Tonight, imagine the heavy hush of a small medieval house, its thatched roof sagging with the weight of night, its single candle guttering in the corner. The air is thick with smoke from the hearth where the last embers die, and the straw-stuffed mattress beside you creaks as you shift alone. Outside, a dog barks, the church bell tolls the late hour, and you feel the weight of an absence so sharp it cuts through the dark. Just yesterday there was another breath beside yours, another hand fumbling with the latch, another laugh over the thin pottage at supper. Now you are a widow, and the walls seem to lean closer with judgment. You'd probably never make it through a single medieval night, but don't worry, I'll guide you safely through. So, before we go any further, if this quiet company helps, you can gently tap like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from, maybe lying awake in New York, or drifting in a quiet room in London. Drop your time and place below, so none of us feel alone tonight. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey, together, here on Timeless Sleep. You sit upright on the hard wooden stool, listening to the creaks of the rafters. Widowhood was not simply grief, it was an unraveling of identity. Your husband's death does not just leave a bed empty, it strips away your standing in the community. In a society where men's names, property, and protection defined women, you are now a loose thread in the tightly woven fabric of the village. Everyone knows it. The neighbors whisper before your door. Even the baker, once friendly, eyes you with a different weight, as though the flour he sells you costs more because of your altered state. The very first night alone carries the deepest terror: survival. In medieval lore, a wife often did not own the cottage she lived in, the strip of land her husband ploughed, or even the very tools by which he earned bread. Those were held by the Lord, who might snatch them back without ceremony once a man died. You might be left to sleep in your husband's bed tonight, but in the morning the bailiff could knock, demand rent you cannot pay, and strip the house bare. Inheritance is not yours by right. Your children's fate lies in the grip of feudal contracts. A cruel irony. The body you helped warm in life now leaves you cold in death. You lie awake and think of food. Not grief first, but food. The bread left on the table will last 2 days, the turnip soup a little longer, yet tomorrow the firewood must be gathered. And who will plough the furrow, mend the roof, patch the worn cloak? Grief must make space for labour, and labour, in turn, gives no room for grief. Hunger claws first, long before sorrow finishes its slow work. Outside, the sound of footsteps echoes on the muddy lane. 2 young men laugh, careless with drink. Their voices rise, and for a moment you freeze, clutching the coarse wool blanket. A widow in the night is a tempting target for gossip, and sometimes worse. You remember the tale of a woman in the next village, widowed last winter, found wandering in the fields, accused of trying to lure men to her bed. She had only been searching for a lost goat, but the story twisted beyond her control. That is the peril of widowhood. Your actions no longer belong to you, but to the tongues of others. When you close your eyes, the church looms in memory. Tomorrow the priest may call on you, not to console but to remind you of your duties. Stay chaste, he will say, or remarry swiftly, lest your idleness breeds sin. The church, after all, is less concerned with your heart than with your obedience. They preach that a widow's tears should be poured into prayer, not into freedom. Yet you know, and the priest knows, that many widows found small ways to bend the rules, to hold secret lovers, to barter intimacy for bread. Medieval sermons thundered against such women, painting them as serpents in veils. Still, the first night brings no sermons, only the faint gnawing of fear. You think of your children asleep beside you. Will the Lord's steward demand them as wards, selling their labor to another household until they come of age? Will he take their inheritance and keep it until, if ever, they are men? Widowhood is not only your fate, it is theirs. A boy may be apprenticed, a girl sent to serve in another kitchen, or worse, married off before her first bleeding. The cold truth of feudal law is that your children are more valuable as property than as kin. You stroke the hair of your youngest, curling against you in sleep. In the dim glow, the child looks peaceful, untouched by the storm. But you know tomorrow's dawn will not spare them. Widows were often asked to swear oaths in court, promising not to remarry without permission, or to remain in the Lord's custody until matters were settled. Imagine being told your very heart was not your own. To some women, widowhood was a prison. To others, Ironically, it was the only crack in the wall where a sliver of light could slip in. The fire spits, a final spark. You recall how your husband once told you that widows were dangerous, free women, with no master. Perhaps he said it as a jest, tossing a bone to the dog while you kneaded bread. But now you sense the truth. The village views you both with pity and with suspicion. You are vulnerable, yet strangely powerful. Without a husband, you are free to speak in court, to manage your affairs, if the Lord allows. But with that comes the watchful eye of every man and woman who fears a woman unmoored. The night drags on, and sleep eludes you. Instead, you remember old tales whispered by the hearth, that widows could see spirits more easily, their liminal state drawing the dead close, that some turned to brewing beer not merely for coin but to lull the nights with intoxication, that others became healers, their loneliness turning into a gift of herbs and whispered prayers. A quirky truth hides here. Many of the women later accused of witchcraft began as widows, their independence making them suspicious to all. It is strange, isn't it, how freedom and fear are tied together like thread and needle. The cock crows too early, or perhaps you never slept. You rise, stiff, and your bones protest. There is no time to mourn. The pot must be set on the fire, the well water hauled, the bread begged or borrowed. Every eye in the village will watch as you step outside, wrapped in black wool. Some will nod with pity, some with calculation, wondering if you might remarry, if your small dowry could be worth the trouble, if your body might be bargained for a few coins of silver. At the churchyard, the gravedigger spits into the soil. He has dug too many holes this winter, and your husband's was just one among many. A plague, a fever, a simple wound. Death needed no excuse in these times. You think of how thin the veil is between survival and ruin. One slip, one illness, one accident, and a woman is cast adrift. In a society where even shoes were a luxury, the margin for safety was thinner than parchment. Later, as you kneel to mend a tunic, you overhear two women by the well. They murmur about your husband's debts, about whether the Lord will seize your goats. Their words prickle like thorns. Gossip, sharper than swords, wounds most in widowhood. You cannot defend yourself without seeming guilty. Silence is twisted into arrogance, speech into defiance. Either way, you lose. And yet, sometimes a widow could lean into that role, using the whispers to craft an aura of mystery, even authority. After all, if they already think you are dangerous, why not let them tremble a little? Your stomach growls, and you laugh bitterly at the sound. Hunger, always the truest sermon. You recall your husband's attempts at humor, his poor riddles by the fire. You whisper one aloud to the empty room, a jest about a cow who tried to attend mass and mooed at the wrong moment. The sound of your own voice startles you, half a laugh, half a sob. In grief, humor is the last shield. A small joke is a rebellion, proof that despair has not consumed you. By afternoon, you drag yourself to the edge of the field. The soil is hard, the furrows dry. You wonder if you might manage a harvest alone, but the truth is plain. A widow without sons or neighbors cannot hope to plough an acre. That is why widows became spinners, brewers, sellers of ale, keepers of chickens. Small labours, enough to scrape by. Yet each required the Lord's permission, each taxed, each vulnerable to theft. Independence in the medieval world was never truly free. It was borrowed time, leased at the price of exhaustion. As the sun sets, you hear the bell again. Another soul gone, another widow made. The village is full of them. Women bent, worn, struggling. Some remarry quickly, their grief swallowed in necessity. Others linger, clinging to their independence, though it costs them comfort, and a few disappear into convent walls, where silence becomes their only companion. Tonight you remain between those choices, the path uncertain. Darkness folds over the village once more. You sit again in your small home, candle flickering, the children asleep. The loneliness presses like a second skin, but beneath it, a strange resilience stirs. You are afraid, yes, but you are not yet broken. Widowhood is a crucible. It burns, but it can also temper. In the crackle of the fire, you sense it. You will survive tonight, and the next and the next. The last ember fades. Tomorrow the struggle begins anew, but for now, in this hushed moment, you let your breath slow. Perhaps you even smile, faint and weary. After all, medieval nights are long, but they always end, and so does sorrow. if only for a while. The morning after grief's first night, you step outside into air still damp with mist, the cobbled path glistening with dew. The bell tower calls for prime, its low hum rolling across the fields like a warning more than a prayer. Your eyes sting from lack of sleep. Yet the world does not pause for your mourning. At your door, the bailiff stands, his tunic stained from old dust, his expression carved from habit rather than cruelty. He holds a parchment, and your stomach sinks before he even speaks. What he brings is not comfort, not pity, but law, and law in this age does not bend for widows. Inheritance is not yours to claim as naturally as a cloak passed down from shoulder to shoulder. Feudal law, with all its knots and loopholes, binds property to men and lords, not to the women who shared their labor. If your husband held land, it belonged ultimately to his overlord. At best, you might keep a portion as dower rights, 1/3 if the law was kind and if the lord consented. At worst, everything passed, not to you, but to the nearest male heir, a brother or cousin you may barely know, or perhaps despise. And if there were debts, those debts fall like stones into your lap, though the means to pay them vanished with your husband's last breath. The bailiff unrolls the parchment and reads aloud, though he knows you cannot decipher the letters. His voice drones in Latin, with occasional scraps of French or English. The words might as well be in Greek. What you do understand is his pause, his quill ready for your mark. Do you consent, he asks, though the question is farce. Refusal is not an option. Consent is required only to make your powerlessness appear voluntary. You hold the quill, dip it in ink, and press an X against the parchment. The ink blots, spreading like the grief in your chest. You have just agreed to less than survival. When you return inside, you feel the walls shift closer, as if even the timber knows it no longer belongs to you. The children play at your feet, oblivious, but you wonder how long they will laugh under this roof. If your husband left no heir old enough to farm, then the land is vulnerable. The Lord may keep it in wardship until your son comes of age, and in the meantime, the prophets fatten his purse. Not yours. A cruel detail, but a true one. A widow could find herself living as a tenant in the very home she once ruled as mistress. The laws differ across regions, but the spirit remains. A widow's right to inheritance is fragile, easily broken by the stroke of a lord's pen. In some towns, especially those governed by Roman law traditions, widows might claim half their husband's estate. In England, however, the custom of primogeniture was merciless. The eldest son took all, and if there were no son, the estate might revert to the crown itself. Imagine that, a widow left with nothing, while the king gains more acres he will never set eyes upon. A monarch's appetite does not shrink, because you are hungry. You remember an old story whispered in the tavern, of a widow who hid her husband's tools after his death. Burying the plough irons beneath the floor, she claimed the land could not be worked without them. Hoping to stall the lord's seizure, for a while the ruse worked. The steward grumbled, the fields lay fallow, but soon a neighbour betrayed her, and she was dragged before the manor court, fined beyond her means. Her children were taken into wardship, her home seized. People laughed at her foolish hope, though you see something braver in it. A woman's desperate attempt to trick a system designed against her. As you gather water from the well, the village women avoid your eyes. They know what the bailiff carried, and in their silence lies a kind of complicity. To comfort you would be to acknowledge their own fragility. Any one of them could be you tomorrow. Widowhood is not a rare fate, but a constant shadow. Even so, a few will gossip in hushed tones, not out of malice alone, but because gossip is their armor. If they tell themselves you lost your inheritance because of some hidden sin, then perhaps they believe their own homes are safer. It is easier to blame a widow than to admit the truth. The law itself is the thief. The afternoon sun burns weakly through the mist, and you find yourself summoned to the manor. The lord sits at his high chair, boots polished, a falcon tethered lazily at his side. He does not look at you as a person, but as a ledger entry. His steward explains the terms. You may remain in your cottage if you pay rent, higher than before. If not, you must leave. You bow your head, teeth clenched. The falcon blinks its golden eye at you, as though it too finds you a curiosity. In rare cases, widows found protection in custom. The widow's bench, for instance, allowed some women to claim a small corner of a husband's estate to survive upon. Yet even that was precarious. A lord could demand Harriet, the widow paying a tax in the form of her husband's best animal or possession before she was allowed to continue. Imagine losing the only cow, the only source of milk for your children, because death required payment. It is like the reaper himself handing a bill at the grave. You walk home heavy with dread, but also with a stubborn flicker of resolve. Perhaps you cannot claim the land, but you can claim the labour of your own hands. Some widows spun wool, others brewed ale. Some kept gardens and sold herbs in the market, yet all these ventures required coin for startup, and coin is exactly what you do not have. A widow without inheritance is like a bird told to fly after its wings are clipped. The effort may be noble, but gravity remains merciless. As evening falls, you sit by the hearth, running your fingers along the wooden spoon your husband once carved. Property, inheritance, law. These words are abstractions when spoken in Latin or carved on parchment, but in your hands, they mean hunger, shelter, survival. The spoon is yours by sentiment, but even it might be claimed if the Lord saw profit in it. Widowhood teaches quickly. Ownership is a lie you live in, only until someone stronger demands proof. You cannot help but feel anger, though it is an anger too dangerous to voice. To curse the law is to curse the Lord, and to curse the Lord is to court ruin. So you mutter your fury into the pot as you stir thin broth, seasoning it with bitterness. It is not much, but it keeps you from choking on despair. If you cannot inherit land, perhaps you will inherit cunning. You remember the priest's words from last Sunday, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." You snorted silently at the time, and now the irony bites harder. The meek do not inherit anything in your world, except hunger. Perhaps in heaven things are different, though heaven feels very far away when your belly growls and your children whimper in their sleep. If God truly rewards meekness, then surely every medieval widow will arrive at the gates of paradise carrying a crown of thorns. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind, something you once heard a travelling peddler say. In some Italian cities, wealthy widows had more control than wives, managing businesses, even lending money. He spoke of them as if they were mythical beasts, free and powerful. You laughed then, but tonight you wonder if such a place could exist, a city where widowhood opened doors instead of closing them. Perhaps it was only the peddler's fancy, a tale spun to sell trinkets. Still, the thought is a strange comfort, that somewhere, someone like you might be less trapped. The night deepens, and you think of your husband not as a ghostly presence, but as a missing shield. He had not been perfect. He snored, he drank too much ale. He once ruined a tunic by trying to patch it with fish skin, but he was a wall against the wind. Without him, every draft seeps through. Inheritance, you realize, is not just about land. It is about the inheritance of protection, of social standing, of simple daily respect, all of which slips from you as quickly as water through cracked pottery. You pull the children closer, their warm breaths a reminder of what you do have. They, at least, are not parchment, not property, not legal clauses. They are flesh, laughter, future, and yet you cannot ignore the law's long reach. If the Lord desires, he may place them in wardship, a polite word for possession. It chills you more than the night air, to lose both husband and children, not to death, but to ink. Sleep will not come easily. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing the smoke stains that look like rivers branching across plaster. You think of the bailiff's parchment, of your mark still wet, binding your future. You think of how fragile your hold on survival is, how quickly it could be torn away, and still, you cling to a stubborn ember inside. You will endure, even if the law says otherwise. The church bell tolls again, its sound weaving through the early light like a thread that pulls you from restless dreams. You rise stiffly, not because you want to, but because the church does not wait for grief. The priest's summons is clear. Widows are watched more closely than most, for idleness and temptation are said to haunt them like shadows. Your husband's death has not only left you with hunger and uncertainty, but has also placed you under the gaze of holy authority. The parish expects you to play a part now, silent, devout and properly sorrowful. To fail in this role is to risk more than gossip. It is to risk the wrath of a church that sees itself as guardian of your soul and your body. You walk toward the small stone church, its walls damp with moss, its windows patched with dull, uneven glass. The air is sharp with incense, the kind that clings to wool and lingers for days. Inside, the priest greets you not with sympathy but with inquiry. He wants to know your intentions. Will you remarry swiftly, to avoid sin, or will you remain chaste, devoting yourself to prayer and service? Either way, your choice is less a choice than a cage. Remarry, and you lose the independence widowhood might afford. Remain single, and you are bound to the church's demands. Either path keeps you under watch. In his sermon, the priest speaks of widows from Scripture, of Anna, who prayed day and night, of Ruth, who remained loyal, of women, who embodied either obedience or piety. He does not speak of hunger or of the taxes that bite into your meager survival. He does not speak of the fear that presses when you hear footsteps outside your cottage at night. His widows are symbols, not flesh and bone. You sit in the pew listening and wonder if he has ever known a widow's empty stomach. As the service ends, you are summoned privately. The priest sits at his wooden chair, tapping a finger against a worn Bible. He warns you, gently but firmly, against wandering affections. A widow's chastity is not only a personal virtue, but in his mind, a community concern. If you are seen speaking too long with a man, if you are glimpsed smiling at the wrong moment, tongues will wag. The church claims to shield you from such gossip, yet in truth it amplifies it. Your body, once a private vessel of marriage, is now a public symbol of virtue or sin, judged daily by those around you. The control is not only spiritual, but material. The church owns lands, collects tithes, and has a say in whether you may remarry. Without its blessing, a new union is not only frowned upon, but declared illegitimate. That means children born of such a match may be called bastards, denied rights and inheritance. The church's hand rests heavily upon your womb, long after your husband's body has gone cold. The irony is bitter. You, who once belonged to one man, now belong to an institution. A story comes to mind, whispered among the women at the market. A young widow in a nearby parish had dared to live alone, rejecting offers of remarriage. She spun wool, sold her goods, and managed by sheer will to survive. The priest accused her of pride and summoned her repeatedly for penance. Each time she stood before the altar, forced to confess sins she had not committed. Eventually, worn down, she fled the village entirely. They say she vanished into the forest, perhaps joining a band of outlaws, or perhaps becoming one herself. No one knew for certain, but the story lingered as a warning. Freedom from men did not mean freedom from the church. You sit outside the church afterward, the sun falling across the graveyard stones. The names carved into them are mostly men's, with women defined by relation. Wife of, daughter of. Rarely does a stone bear only a woman's name. You trace the letters with your finger and think of your own fate. Without property, without protection, without a voice in law, even in death you may be remembered only as someone's shadow. The church tells you this is proper, that humility earns salvation, yet your heart whispers something else, that perhaps humility is just another form of silencing. Your thoughts drift to remarriage, the path the priest most clearly favors. It is tempting, in its promise of stability. Another husband could shield you from poverty, protect your children from wardship, silence the gossip that swirls around you. But remarriage is not chosen from love. It is bargained like livestock. Suitors will not ask what you want. They will ask what you bring: a cottage, a field, a dowry of labor. To marry again is to exchange one master for another, perhaps gentler, perhaps harsher. You wonder if freedom, fragile as it is, might be worth more than security. The priest, of course, does not speak of freedom. He speaks of duty. A widow's virtue lies in submission to the church, to the next husband, to God's law. There is little space in that triangle for your own voice. Yet you remember how your husband once joked that priests feared women more than devils. The devil at least wears horns, he said, but a woman wears her hair. You chuckled then, but now you see the truth. The church fears women's independence because it cannot bind it with vows as easily as it binds men. As you return home, villagers glance at you. Their looks are not cruel, but assessing. Has the priest spoken to you? Will you remarry? Will you obey? They measure you against the invisible lines drawn by custom and sermon. You feel the weight of their eyes, heavier than the bucket of water you carry. In their gaze, you are not merely a woman, but a lesson, a mirror in which they see what might await them should death strike their own households. The children greet you at the door, their laughter momentarily softening the hardness of the day. Yet even they are not free from the church's hold. A priest may claim authority over their upbringing, insisting they serve as choir boys, or enter service to pay debts of piety. You kiss their foreheads, promising silently that you will shield them as long as you can. Protection, however, is fragile when every institution around you conspires to claim them. That evening, you light a candle and whisper a prayer, not because you believe the church will intercede, but because silence feels too heavy without words. You pray not for salvation, but for strength, the strength to endure hunger, to dodge gossip, to face the priest's scrutiny with your spine unbent. If God hears you, perhaps he smiles at your stubbornness. If he does not, at least the prayer fills the empty air. In a quieter moment, you think of widows in scripture again. The priest praises their meekness, but you recall another, the widow who demanded justice from the unjust judge, pestering him until he gave in. Persistence, not meekness, won her case. Perhaps the priest forgot that tale, or perhaps he feared its lesson. You file it away in your memory, a small ember of defiance. If even scripture grants a widow a voice, then maybe yours need not remain silent forever. The night grows cold, and you draw your shawl tight. You imagine, with a wry smile, how priests warn against widows turning to sin in their solitude, as if sin is something you have time for, when survival consumes your hours. If a devil did appear, offering bread in exchange for your soul, you might at least bargain for cheese as well. The thought makes you laugh softly, a joke to yourself, a rebellion in miniature. Humor, after all, is the one indulgence the church cannot tax. When sleep finally comes, it is uneasy. Dreams of priests wagging fingers blend with images of empty fields, yet beneath the fear, there is a thread of resolve. You are not meek, Anna, nor silent Ruth. You are flesh and hunger, and stubbornness. The church may watch, the priest may preach, but you will endure, even if endurance is your only rebellion. The candle gutters, the wax pooling like spilled milk. Tomorrow, you will return to the fields, to the market, to the endless balance between survival and virtue, and though the church claims to guide your soul, you know the truth. Only you can carry it forward, one fragile step at a time. The village well is always louder than the church, a different kind of sermon entirely. Water sloshes into wooden buckets, iron chains creak, and voices spill across the square like geese in spring. You step carefully across the mud, shawl pulled close, aware of how quickly sound bends into rumor. In this place, gossip is more powerful than the sword, sharper too, because it cuts without drawing blood. As a widow, you are both subject and spectacle, the hushed pause in every conversation, the unspoken, there she goes, following your steps. You set down your bucket, waiting your turn. Two women stand nearby, their heads bent close, speaking in tones that carry just enough for you to hear. They wonder if you'll remarry, if perhaps you've already caught someone's eye. They wonder aloud whether you'll manage to keep the cottage, or if the Lord will throw you out. You glance at them, but they do not lower their gaze. In their world, you are no longer shielded by a husband's presence. You are fair game for scrutiny. Gossip in a medieval village is not idle chatter. It is a form of control. Through whispers, a community enforces its own laws more ruthlessly than parchment or priests. If they decide you are virtuous, they might carry your burdens, bring you bread in times of hunger. But if they decide otherwise, if they paint you as proud, sinful, or careless, you may find yourself alone, doors shut against you. A widow cannot afford to ignore this court of tongues. Reputation is as necessary as bread, and just as fragile. You remember hearing once of a widow accused of poisoning her husband's ale. There was no proof, no wound, only rumor. But in the end, it mattered little. The story spread so quickly that even the priest avoided her. She fled to another town, branded forever by a tale that began at a well like this one. It strikes you that a widow's life depends less on truth than on perception. Survival is a performance. Every gesture weighed and measured. You dip your bucket and let the cool water rise. The women's voices drone on, this time about a different neighbor. A laugh escapes one of them, sharp and brittle. For a moment you imagine yourself joining in, laughing along, feeding the chain that binds you. But the thought curdles quickly. You know too well how laughter at another's expense might soon turn toward you. In gossip, there are no allies, only temporary shields. Back at your cottage, the whispers echo still. Even the children hear them. Your eldest daughter asks why the neighbors speak your name so often. You tell her softly that people talk when they do not know what else to do. Yet you also know that gossip shapes her future. A girl raised in a house tarnished by rumor may struggle to find a husband or a place in another's household. The stain spreads easily. One tongue can blacken a family. The weight of gossip is not always cruel, though. Sometimes it is absurd. You hear one day that you've been seen walking under the moon with a phantom lover. The truth? You were gathering herbs for your son's cough. Another rumor claims you hoard coins under your mattress. You who count every crust of bread like treasure. You almost laugh at the ridiculousness, until you remember how dangerous such tales can be. To accuse a widow of secret wealth is to invite thieves, or worse, the steward's greedy hand. And then there are the softer murmurs, the ones that sound like pity but cut just as deeply. She was such a devoted wife, they say. Poor thing, alone now. You would rather they spit than pity. Pity is a leash, one that keeps you in the role of victim, yet rejecting pity openly is dangerous too, for then you become proud, defiant, unnatural. A widow must strike the narrowest of paths, balancing humility with dignity, silence with resilience. At market the whispers grow louder. You spread your small cloth with herbs and spun thread, hoping to trade for bread. Eyes follow you. Some buyers haggle more sharply than they would with a married woman. As if your widowhood lowers the worth of your wares, others avoid your stall altogether, wary of whatever misfortune clings to you. Still, a few men linger too long, their smiles oily, their offers of help dripping with implication. Gossip feeds desire as much as suspicion. To them, you are both vulnerable and available, a dangerous combination. Even children pick up the habit. You hear them giggling, chanting half rhymes about widows who lure men into the woods. Their voices sting more than they should. Children repeat what they hear at home, turning adult malice into playground rhyme. It is proof that gossip seeps everywhere, shaping not just your present but your legacy. Your children will grow up under the weight of those rhymes, carrying your widowhood like a second skin. Some evenings, you retreat to the edge of the fields, where the wind carries only the rustle of barley. Here, for a moment, gossip cannot reach you. You breathe, letting silence wash over your bruised ears. It is in these moments you realize how much of your life is spent under the gaze of others. Widowhood is not solitude. It is crowded, suffocating, filled with voices that claim authority over your choices. And yet, in the field's hush, you remember you are still yourself, a woman with hands that can spin, a voice that can sing, a will that can resist. Still, the danger of gossip is real. You know too well that whispers can harden into accusations of witchcraft. A widow living alone, muttering to herself, gathering herbs by moonlight. The portrait is too easy for frightened villagers to draw. A woman without a man is unnatural, they say, and unnatural things invite suspicion. You think of the old woman burned in a nearby town, accused of cursing cows when the milk soured. She too had been a widow, living on the margins, a convenient scapegoat for misfortune. But gossip is not all-powerful. Sometimes it tangles itself, losing strength. You hear two conflicting tales about yourself in 1 week. One claims you're begging for food at night, the other that you dine richly on hidden stalls. The contradiction almost makes you smile. If you are both starving and feasting, perhaps the truth is invisible altogether. A small, ironic comfort. Gossip thrives on certainty, but you can muddy its waters with mystery. You begin, slowly, to play the game. You learn to answer questions with vagueness, to give neighbors just enough to chew on without letting them bite too deeply. The story here, a sigh there, small performances that shape the tale. It is dangerous work, but necessary. If they must talk, let them at least talk about what you feed them. You become, in a way, the author of your own whispers. And there are moments, rare but real, when gossip bends in your favor. A neighbor, softened by pity or by fear of sin, leaves bread at your door. Another insists she saw you praying late into the night, your devotion so strong it humbled her. You do not correct her, though in truth you were simply awake with worry. Sometimes gossip can shield as much as it scars if you know how to lean into it. Humor, again, becomes your ally. When one villager asks slyly if you are seeking a new husband, you reply with a weary smile, only if he comes with 2 cows and no tongue. The laughter that follows is genuine, and for a moment the tension breaks. A joke is a clever blade, It cuts without drawing blood, disarming even as it protects. Perhaps you think, laughter is the only weapon a widow may wield without consequence. Yet, even as you learn to bend gossip, you never forget its danger. One false step, one unlucky turn, and whispers can sharpen into accusations you cannot escape. You tread carefully, never fully trusting, always aware that survival is not only about feeding the body, but also about feeding the story others tell of you. In this way, gossip becomes a second life, one you must live as carefully as the first. At night, when the village sleeps and the well is silent, you sit by the fire and let the day's voices fade. The crackle of wood is a kinder sound than any human tongue. You sip thin broth and allow yourself the smallest smile. You may be the subject of endless talk, but you are still here, still breathing, still shaping tomorrow's rumor, and that, you think, is its own quiet triumph. The loom creaks as you set the shuttle in motion, thread sliding through fingers roughened by work. The cottage smells faintly of wool and smoke, the two scents that cling most stubbornly to a widow's life. Work is your shield now, the one thing that stands between you and utter ruin. Without a husband's income, without inheritance, you turn to the trades allowed or tolerated for women. It is not noble labor, not ploughing a field or swinging a hammer, but the quieter, mumbler crafts that keep a household afloat. Spinning, weaving, brewing, nursing, even begging when all else fails. The hum of industry becomes your prayer, your answer to hunger. You begin with spinning, the simplest task, for wool is plentiful in these lands. You sit by the hearth with a drop spindle, twisting fibers into yarn, your feet bare on the packed earth floor. Spinning is considered proper for widows. Useful, unthreatening, a task that keeps hands busy and tongues silent. A spindle weighs little, but hours of twisting ache through your wrists and shoulders. You sell the yarn to a fuller in town, though he pays you half what he would a man. He shrugs when you protest. Women's yarn is softer, weaker, he claims. You know it is a lie, but you take the coin anyway, for coin is survival. Brewing ale offers a sharper hope. Every village needs ale. It is safer than water, nourishment in liquid form. Widows have long brewed small batches, selling them by the jug in markets or from their own doorways. You set a pot on the fire, stirring barley and herbs, the sweet yeasty smell rising into the rafters. For a moment, you allow yourself a smile. Ale brings laughter, warmth, community, but it also brings risk. If the brew is sour, neighbors will scorn you. If it is too strong, the church will call it sin. And if it is too good, the alewives' guild in town may accuse you of stealing their trade. Even work is a trap, lined with rules you never wrote. Some widows turn to nursing, tending the sick and injured with herbs and poultices. You know a little of this? Your mother taught you which leaves soothe a fever, which roots ease a cough. When a neighbor's child takes ill, you sit by his bed, wiping sweat from his brow. His mother thanks you but whispers later that your knowledge is dangerous. Healing is a narrow path, one step from blessing to curse. Too much success, and you may be accused of witchcraft. Too little, and you are useless. Either way, suspicion follows. On darker days when yarn sells poorly and ale spoils, you walk the road to town with nothing but your empty hands. Begging is the widow's last resort, a role both pitied and scorned. You sit near the church doors, cloak drawn tight, and murmur for alms. Some passers-by drop coins, muttering prayers for their own souls. Others spit, accusing you of laziness. You bow your head either way. Dignity is a luxury hunger cannot afford, yet begging holds its own strange power. It forces the community to confront what they would rather ignore, that women like you survive only by their mercy. Children, too, become part of the labor. Your daughter spins beside you, her small fingers nimble with wool. Your son runs errands, carrying jugs of ale to the tavern in exchange for crusts of bread. You hate that their childhood slip away into toil, but necessity does not ask permission. In the eyes of the village, this is simply how it must be. Widows without children are pitied for loneliness. Widows with children are pitied for their burdens. Either way, pity offers no bread. The weight of taxes presses even on your work. The Lord demands a share of ale brewed, of wool spun, of herbs gathered. Nothing is free, not even the sweat from your own body. You pay in coin when you have it. in goods when you do not. Once, when you could not pay at all, the steward took a chicken from your yard. Your son cried as he watched it carried away, its squawking fading into the distance. In that moment, you realize taxes are not merely numbers on a tally, but the sound of your children's hunger echoing in your ears. Still, there are small victories. One market day, your ale sells better than expected. A group of masons working nearby praise its strength, passing the jug between them until laughter drowns out their weariness. They press extra coin into your hand, and for once you return home with a pouch that jingles. You allow yourself a moment of pride, the pride of having earned or fed your children not from charity but from your own skill. That night, you make the broth a little thicker, the bread a little softer. It tastes almost like hope, but hope too breeds jealousy. The next week, another woman sneers that your ale must be bewitched too strong for a widow to brew honestly. The words sting, not because they are true, but because they reveal how quickly success becomes a threat. A widow who thrives without a husband unsettles the balance of the village. Work in their eyes is acceptable only if it keeps you just above starvation, never above comfort. The monotony of labor becomes its own rhythm. Spindle, loom, pot, market, repeat. Days blur into one another, marked only by the seasons. In winter, your fingers crack from cold yarn stiff in your hands. In summer, the brew ferments too quickly. Turning sour in the heat, there is no pause, no respite. Work is constant, and yet never enough. Widowhood means living on the edge of exhaustion, with no cushion to soften the fall. One evening, as you sit spinning by the fire, you think of how different your life might be if you had been born in another station. Noble widows often held estates in their own right, their signatures sealing contracts, their wealth protecting them from hunger. Some even managed manors, employing stewards and tenants. Their widowhood was not a sentence but a crown, a chance to wield authority without a husband's shadow. You almost laugh at the contrast. A noble widow may build a chapel. You are lucky to mend a tunic. The difference is not virtue but birth. Still, even among the poor, there are tales of resourceful widows. You recall one who carved spoons and bowls from fallen wood, selling them in market until she gained enough to buy a goat. That goat birthed kids, and soon she had milk, cheese, and trade enough to survive. Her story is told like a miracle, though you know it was not miracle, but relentless labor. Perhaps one day your own children will tell such a story of you, how you spun wool until your fingers bled, how you brewed ale in pots too heavy for one woman to lift, how you begged when pride was a luxury. Humor creeps into the work sometimes, though softly. As you card wool one afternoon, your son teases that you look like a sheep yourself, tufts of fiber clinging to your hair and cloak. You laugh, surprising yourself with the sound. For a moment, the cottage is filled, not with struggle but with warmth. It reminds you that even in poverty, there is space for joy, small, fleeting, but real. A joke is as necessary as bread, perhaps more so. Yet beneath the laughter lies fatigue. Your back aches, your eyes blur, your hands tremble after hours at the loom. You know that if illness strikes, work will stop, and hunger will follow swiftly. Widowhood offers no margin for weakness. The thought haunts you more than gossip, more than taxes. Death is never far in these times, and even the smallest ailment can unravel everything. You brew stronger ale some nights, hoping the drink will numb the ache long enough to keep you at the spindle. You notice, too, how work isolates you. Married women spin and weave, yes, but they do so with husbands to bring bread, with neighbors less suspicious of their motives. You labor alone, and in that solitude, every task becomes heavier. Even when you join other women at the well or market, you are marked by difference. Widows' work is not just survival, it is a reminder to everyone else of what they fear becoming. You carry not only your own burden, but the dread of others. Still, as you sit by the fire at night, yarn piled at your feet, you remind yourself that labor is also life. The creak of the loom, the hiss of boiling ale, the soft rasp of herbs crushed between your fingers, these sounds and scents tether you to the world. They remind you that despite poverty, despite gossip, despite the church's watch, you are not yet defeated. Work bends your back, but steels your will. It becomes the rhythm of resilience, a slow, stubborn song. In the end, perhaps that is what widow's work truly is. Not a path to wealth, not a shield from judgment, but a testament. Each spindle's twist, Each jug of ale, each whispered plea for alms is proof that you are still here, still breathing, still enduring, and in a world that would prefer you silent, invisible, erased. Endurance itself is a kind of defiance. The knock at the door is soft at first, then firmer, the kind of knock that says the visitor will not leave until answered. You open it cautiously, shawl drawn close, and find your neighbour standing there, a man with eyes too kind to be trusted. He brings a loaf of bread, warm from the oven, and sets it in your hands before you can refuse. Gratitude catches in your throat, but then you see the look in his eyes, the pause that lingers too long, the silence heavy with expectation. Charity in a village like this is rarely free. He lingers at the doorway, speaking gently of how difficult it must be to manage alone, how dangerous for a woman without protection. His voice is not unkind, yet his words coil like vines. You need someone to help, he says, someone to watch over you. You know what he means, not help but possession. If you accept too much bread, too much kindness, you risk binding yourself to him without words, without ceremony. Exploitation wears many faces, and sometimes it wears a smile. Such offers come often. Another neighbour offers to mend your roof, though his eyes wander to the bed you share with your children. The blacksmith's apprentice brings wood for the fire, staying a little too long by the hearth. Even the steward's gaze lingers when he delivers the Lord's demands. In widowhood, every gesture of aid is coloured by calculation. Men see your vulnerability as an opening, a space to insert themselves into your life and your body. The line between generosity and exploitation is thin, and you must walk it daily. There are subtler forms too. A woman at the market offers to buy your yarn, but insists on a price half its worth, her tone dripping with false sympathy. You poor thing, I'll take it off your hands, she says, as if she were rescuing you rather than robbing you. The Lord's Reeve suggests he might overlook a late tax if you provide him with companionship. Exploitation is not always loud. Often it is whispered, hidden beneath layers of pity and pretense. You think of another widow once known in the village, a woman who lost everything after her husband's death. She accepted favours from a wealthier neighbour, firewood, meat, a cow for milk. In return, she owed him loyalty, silence, and eventually her bed. When she tried to refuse, the favours dried up, and the gossip swelled. Ungrateful, they called her, though it was he who had demanded gratitude in flesh. Her story is a caution, whispered as warning to others, beware of debts that cannot be repaid in coin. One day the priest himself visits, offering prayers and advice. His words are sanctified but no less entangling. He suggests that perhaps the safest path for you would be to marry again, to avoid temptation, to secure protection. He names a widower in the next parish, a man twice your age with 3 children. His suggestion carries weight. To reject it risks not only his disapproval, but the church's suspicion. You smile and nod, heart heavy, knowing how closely advice and command intertwine when spoken from a pulpit. You begin to notice how quickly kindness turns to control. A single loaf of bread becomes leverage. A roof repair becomes a claim. Neighbours who once treated you as equal now treat you as opportunity. Even women, though less threatening, exploit in their way, asking you to take in their children as helpers without pay, demanding your labour at harvest in exchange for friendship. Widowhood strips you not only of a husband, but of the boundaries that once protected you. Without them, you are seen not as person, but as resource. And then there are the cruelties wrapped in mockery. A group of young men passes your door one evening, singing a crude song about widows seeking company. Their laughter rings through the lane, leaving you burning with shame and fury. You know better than to confront them. Anger only fuels their mirth. Yet their jest reveals the truth. In the eyes of many, you are not a grieving woman, but a figure of ridicule, a body unclaimed and therefore open to all. Despite this, there are moments when exploitation can be twisted into survival. You learn to smile politely at offers, to accept the bread without promising more, to nod at the priest without binding yourself to his will. You play the game of politeness, of humility, giving just enough to satisfy without yielding fully. It is dangerous. This dance, for one misstep, could brand you deceitful or unchaste. But it is the only way to navigate a world where every hand extended may also be a chain. At times, you even find yourself laughing at the absurdity of it. When one man insists you cannot possibly manage your cottage alone, you tell him with a wry smile that the walls haven't collapsed yet, and neither have you. The joke startles him, and for a moment he is disarmed. Humor becomes your armor, light but sharp, reminding you that exploitation feeds on silence. A laugh, however small, can break its grip. Yet laughter does not erase the fear. Each night you bolt the door, listening for footsteps outside. You know that kindness can sour quickly into force, that desperation can turn a neighbor's smile into menace. The memory of the widow in the next town, dragged from her bed by a man she once trusted, lingers in your mind. No law protects you, no authority listens. If harm comes, it will be whispered about, pitied, then forgotten. Exploitation is not a crime here, it is a custom. Still, you endure. You find strength in the rhythm of your work, in the laughter of your children, in the small victories of each day survived. You remind yourself that not all who help seek to control, a few truly mean it. A loaf given without expectation, a kind word offered with no hidden edge. These rare moments shine brighter for their scarcity, reminding you that humanity is not entirely lost. Yet even then, you cannot help but wonder what price will be demanded tomorrow. The most insidious exploitation, you realize, is not in grand gestures, but in the small assumptions. That you will accept less for your goods, that you will tolerate unwanted glances, that you will bear hunger quietly, rather than cause offense. It is in the way your voice is dismissed, the way your needs are minimized, the way your survival is treated as conditional. Exploitation is not only what is done to you, it is what is expected of you, day after day. One evening, as you mend a cloak by firelight, your daughter asks why people are sometimes unkind. You pause, needle in hand, struggling to answer. How do you explain to a child that unkindness is often disguised as help, that exploitation wears many masks? You tell her simply that not every gift is truly a gift, and that wisdom lies in knowing the difference. She nods solemnly, her eyes older than her years. Widowhood ages not only the widow, but her children too. In the quiet, you reflect on how survival itself is a kind of defiance. Every day you resist the pull of others' control. You carve out a sliver of autonomy. It may be small, a coin earned, a choice made, a boundary held, but it is yours. Exploitation thrives when you surrender fully. To resist, even in small ways, is to reclaim some measure of power. And so, you rise each morning with wary eyes, but steady hands. You accept bread when needed, but you do not bow. You allow kindness, but you question its roots. You walk the narrow path between gratitude and independence, between survival and surrender. It is exhausting, yes, but it is also proof that you remain more than the sum of others' expectations. You know the world will not change for you. The Lord will not suddenly grant freedom. The priest will not stop preaching. Neighbors will not stop measuring your worth in whispers and offers. But you can change how you walk within it. Exploitation may shadow you, but it does not define you. What defines you is the quiet strength to see it, to name it, to endure it without letting it hollow you out. And at the end of each long day, when you bolt the door and sit by the fire, you allow yourself a moment of peace. You sip your thin ale, listen to the soft breathing of your children, and remind yourself that you have made it through another day. Exploitation hovers, always waiting, but so does your resilience. And in that balance, precarious, fragile, but real, you find a kind of victory the world cannot take. The steward's arrival is never quiet. His horse's hooves clatter against the cobbles, his cloak trimmed with fur far richer than anything you have ever touched. Children scatter at his approach, women bow their heads, and men stiffen with unease. He carries with him not only the authority of the Lord, but the weight of every tax, every fine, every demand that keeps the villagers tethered. And as a widow, his shadow falls heavier upon you than most. He dismounts outside your cottage, his eyes already searching, measuring. The debt of your late husband is still noted in his books, though death did not erase it. He informs you, in clipped tones, that taxes remain due for the cottage, for the strip of land, for the hearth itself. It matters little that you no longer have the strength or resources to pay. The law of the manor is blunt. Dues must be collected, and widows are no exception. You listen as he explains the Harriet, the death tax, the Lord's right to claim the best animal or possession from a household upon a man's death. In your case, it was the cow, taken before you had even risen from mourning. The steward recounts it casually, as though you were describing the weather. The memory stings still, not only for the hunger it caused, but for the humiliation, to watch the beast led away while your children cried. When you protest that you cannot pay more, he smiles without warmth. The Lord is merciful, he says, but mercy has its limits. He suggests that if you cannot produce coin, you may pay in labor, extra days in the fields, gathering crops for the manor, or perhaps spinning wool for the steward's household. To refuse would brand you uncooperative, and uncooperative widows do not survive long. You nod, though your hands tremble. Survival, once again, demands submission. The taxes extend beyond coin and labor. You must give a portion of your harvest, though your garden barely yields enough for your own table. The steward does not care. Grain is measured, recorded, taken. The loss is felt in the hollow bellies of your children, not in his ledger. Each sack carried away feels like a piece of your future stolen, leaving you weaker with every season. You remember hearing of a widow in another village who resisted, hiding part of her harvest in a hollow tree. When discovered, she was dragged before the manor court, fined beyond her means, and eventually evicted. Her children scattered, some taken into service, others lost to hunger. Her story spreads as both warning and justification. See what happens to those who defy. Fear keeps most compliant, even when compliance starves them. The irony is sharp. The church preaches charity. The Lord proclaims justice. Yet both demand payment from the poorest shoulders. You think bitterly that widows must pay twice for death, once in grief, once in coin. The steward speaks of duty to the realm, but you see only his hands heavy with rings, his horse fat with grain. You wonder if he has ever felt hunger, if he even knows what it is to count crusts of bread like treasure. Sometimes the burden grows absurd. One year, when the harvest failed, the steward still arrived, demanding his share. You offered wilted cabbages and shriveled onions, but he sneered. The Lord cannot eat excuses, he said. In the end, you parted with the blanket from your bed, woven by your mother long ago. It kept his household warm that winter while you and your children shivered. Taxes are not only numbers, they are memories stripped away, and yet you find small ways to endure. You learn to stretch meals thinner, to trade labor with neighbors, to mend clothes until they are more patch than fabric. You teach your children to gather nettles and wild greens, bitter but filling. In this way, you survive the steward's visits, though each one leaves you feeling less like a tenant and more like a prisoner. There are moments of dark humor too, for even oppression sometimes invites laughter. When the steward once demanded a tithe of eggs, you handed him 3 cracked ones from a restless hen. He frowned, muttered about poor quality, and left in a huff. Afterward, you laughed with your children until tears ran down your cheeks. It was a small rebellion, but rebellion nonetheless. Sometimes defiance looks like nothing more than laughter at authority's expense. But the truth cannot be ignored. Taxes weigh most heavily on widows. A man might negotiate, bargain with strength, or threaten to leave his land fallow. A woman has no such leverage. You are expected to bow, to accept, to endure. Any resistance is seen as insolence, proof that you cannot manage alone. The system is designed to remind you daily that you are weaker, poorer, dependent, even when your labor proves otherwise. You think of noble widows again, those who controlled estates rather than suffered under them. Their taxes were collected, not paid. They dined richly while you counted roots and scraps. The contrast burns, though it also sharpens your resolve. If they can wield power, why not you? The thought is dangerous, but it lingers. Perhaps survival begins with imagining what could be different. Some evenings, as you mend clothes by the fire, you imagine confronting the steward. You picture yourself standing tall, declaring that his demands are unjust, that widows deserve mercy. In your dream, he falters, shamed, and leaves empty-handed. But when dawn comes, the fantasy fades. Reality is harsher. To speak so boldly would risk eviction, disgrace, ruin. Courage in dreams is free. Courage in daylight costs everything. Still, not every steward is cruel. Once, a younger man came in place of the usual collector. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, his voice softer than expected. He accepted what little you could give without sneer or scorn, and for a brief moment, you saw humanity beneath the cloak of authority. It reminded you that oppression is not always personal. Sometimes it is simply the machinery of the world grinding down all in its path. That thought, strangely, gave you a measure of comfort. If cruelty is not always choice, then perhaps kindness is possible too. The children ask why the steward takes so much. You hesitate before answering, then tell them simply, because he can. Their eyes widen, their young minds struggling with such blunt truth. You wish you could give them a softer answer, one that speaks of justice or fairness, but lies serve no one. Better they know now that survival requires not trust in authority, but resilience in the face of it. You begin to teach them small tricks, how to stretch broth, how to mend shoes with scraps, how to hide small stores of food without drawing suspicion. It is a grim inheritance, but an honest one. They will grow up knowing how to endure what the world demands, how to survive even when the steward's hand presses hard. In teaching them, you feel a flicker of pride. Poverty may bend you, but it will not break them. And so, the rhythm continues. The steward arrives, takes his due, and leaves. Each visit chips away at your security, yet each time you rebuild, piece by piece, you learn to measure success not in wealth, but in survival. Another day fed, another night sheltered. Widowhood is a life of constant subtraction, yet even subtraction leaves something behind. What remains is your will, your stubborn refusal to vanish. When you close your eyes at night, you sometimes hear the steward's voice still, demanding, measuring, taking, but you also hear the softer sounds, your children breathing beside you, the crackle of the fire, the rustle of the loom. These are yours, untaxed, unclaimed. They are proof that despite the Lord's demands, despite the weight of feudal law, you remain. And in a world built on taking, the simple act of remaining is a victory all its own. The knock comes before dawn, when the world is still hushed and damp, and even the roosters have not yet stirred. You open the door to find two men you know well, the reeve and a village elder standing solemn, their cloaks heavy with dew. Their faces are not cruel, but they are set with duty, and you feel your stomach turn before they speak. They have come not for you this time, but for your children. Wardship, they explain, is the Lord's right. When a father dies leaving minor heirs, those heirs become the responsibility of their overlord. The Lord protects them, they say, by placing them under another's care until they come of age. But you know the truth. Wardship is profit disguised as guardianship. Your son, though small and thin, is strong enough to labor in the fields. Your daughter, though not yet a woman, can sweep, sow, and serve. Their futures are now bargaining chips, traded as easily as grain. You plead, of course, your voice trembling as you beg them to leave the children with you. You argue that they are too young, that they need their mother, that you will manage somehow. But the reeve only shakes his head, reciting the law as though it were scripture. The heirs are the Lord's responsibility, he says. His tone is not unkind, but unyielding. You realize, bitterly, that he is not only taking your children, he is also taking the last fragments of your authority as a mother. Your son clings to your skirt, his small fingers digging into the wool. He does not understand the words, only that they mean separation. Your daughter stands silent, wide-eyed, as though already resigned. You tell them not to be afraid, though you are terrified yourself. The men lead them away, your son crying, your daughter glancing back only once. You stand in the doorway until their figures vanish into the mist, your arms aching with the emptiness where their bodies once pressed. Wardship is not merely about custody, it is about profit. The Lord may place your children with a guardian who pays for the privilege, gaining the right to their labor, until they are grown. If your son inherits land one day, the guardian controls it in the meantime, reaping its profits. If your daughter is of marriageable age, the guardian may arrange her marriage, often to his own advantage, rarely to hers. Your children's lives, their futures, are not theirs to decide. They are assets, investments, pawns in the larger game of feudal exchange. You hear later that your son has been sent to a distant farm, where he rises before dawn to tend pigs and pull weeds. Your daughter, only 12, is placed in a wealthier household to serve as a maid. Both will labor long hours, their small bodies bent by work. They will be fed, perhaps clothed, but they will not be comforted. They will grow up faster than they should, stripped of the softness of childhood. The thought gnaws at you, sharper than hunger. In rare cases, widows could pay to keep their children with them, a fee called custody money, but you have no coins, no property to pledge. You could sell yourself into service, but even then it would not guarantee their return. The Lord's profit outweighs your tears. You think of noble widows again, how they paid ransoms to guard their children's inheritance, how their wealth shielded them from wardship's cruelty. But for the poor, the law is iron, and iron does not bend. The village whispers. Of course, some murmur sympathy. Poor woman, to lose them so soon. Others suggest it may be a blessing, fewer mouths to feed. Their pity feels like salt rubbed into wounds. You do not want their sympathy, nor their judgments. You want your children back. But widowhood has no room for wants, only for endurance. You carry their absence like a stone in your chest, heavy and unmovable. At night, the silence is unbearable. The cottage feels cavernous without their voices, without their quarrels and laughter. You lie awake listening to the emptiness, wishing for the sound of a cough, a whimper, anything that proves they are near. Even your dreams betray you, filled with images of them crying for you, reaching out with hands you cannot touch. You wake with tears on your cheeks, the blanket damp beneath your face. A rumor reaches you months later. Your daughter is betrothed, promised already to a boy she barely knows. She is 13 now, her childhood traded away for alliance and profit. You want to rage, to storm the manor, to demand her return. But what power does a widow hold? To protest is to risk punishment, even banishment. So you grieve quietly, stitching her absence into the seams of your life. You wonder if she blames you, if she believes you gave her away willingly. That thought cuts deeper than any blade. Your son too changes in your mind's eye. You picture him taller, his voice deepening, his hands rough from labor. Will he remember you when he returns, or will he be a stranger, molded by another man's household? Wardship does not only steal years, it steals bonds, reshaping children into tools of others' making. By the time they are grown, the family you knew may be gone forever. And yet, there are small mercies. Once your son sneaks back to the village, his face dirty, his tunic torn. He stands at your door at dawn, clutching a crust of bread, as if it were gold. He stays only an hour, enough to whisper stories of his labor, enough to lay his head in your lap and feel, for a moment, like a child again. Then he leaves, slipping back before he is missed. You watch him go, torn between joy and despair. His presence heals you, even as his absence deepens. A neighbor tells you quietly that she too lost her children to wardship years ago. One never returned, the other came back hardened, unable to speak of what he had endured. She says it without tears, her voice flacked with time. You learn to live with it. She says, you have no choice. You nod, though the words feel like a sentence rather than advice. Humor, though faint, still finds its way into grief. One evening, you mutter aloud that if the Lord insists on taking children, he might at least pay for their shoes. The absurdity makes you laugh, though the laughter feels brittle, ready to break. Still, the joke lightens the air, if only for a moment. Sometimes, mocking the system, even privately, is the only rebellion left. You begin to carve small tokens, scraps of wood shaped into clumsy animals, to send with neighbors who might travel near your children's households. It is a mother's desperate attempt to bridge distance, to remind them that they are remembered, that they are loved. Whether they receive them or not, you do not know. But the carving itself comforts you, a tangible act of devotion in a world that strips you of control. In time, you learn to live around the absence. The cottage is quieter, the work heavier, but you adapt. You rise earlier, labor longer, speak less. Widowhood teaches you to bend without breaking. Though sometimes you wonder if you are bending too far, you carry on not because you have hope, but because survival demands it. Each day is another step, another breath, another proof that you remain even when so much has been taken. And though your children are gone, they are never truly absent. They live in every stitch of clothing you mend, in every loaf you bake, in every prayer whispered before bed. They are the shadow at your side, the echo in your chest. You endure not only for yourself, but for them, hoping that one day, somehow, the world will bend enough to bring them back to you. The tavern is a place of noise, smoke and the bitter tang of ale that clings to every stone. You step inside, clutching a jug at your hip, hoping to sell enough to cover tomorrow's bread. The room brims with voices, laughter, curses, and the scrape of boots on rush-strewn floors. Candles burn low, their wax dripping like honey onto rough-hewn tables. The tavern is not a place widows frequent lightly, yet sometimes necessity drags you here, into the loud heart of village life, where judgment and opportunity mingle uneasily. The moment you enter, eyes follow. Men look up from their mugs, some with curiosity, others with hunger thinly veiled as amusement. Women glance sidelong, some sympathetic, others wary of what your presence might mean. A widow in a tavern is a spectacle, too visible, too vulnerable, too easily misread. You know the whispers will spread before you've even returned home. She was seen in the tavern, they will murmur. What business does she have there? But hunger silences pride. You square your shoulders and walk toward the innkeeper. The innkeeper himself greets you with a shrug. He takes the jug you've brought, pours a measure into a wooden cup, and tastes it with exaggerated ceremony. His verdict, at least, is favorable. Strong enough? He says, pressing a few coins into your palm. Relief softens your shoulders for a moment. The coins are not many, but they are something. You could almost leave them, return home before the room swallows you whole. But you hesitate. To leave too quickly would look suspicious. To stay too long would look worse. Widowhood, even here, demands careful choreography. The tavern is not merely a place of trade, it is where news circulates, where deals are struck, where alliances are whispered over mugs of ale. You listen quietly as men discuss harvest yields, the price of wool, rumors of war far beyond your village. The words swirl around you like smoke. For a moment, you feel almost included, as if you have stepped back into a world from which widowhood exiled you. But then the laughter turns toward you. One man raises his mug and toasts loudly. To the widow, may she find company before the night is through. The room erupts in chuckles, and heat rushes to your cheeks. You force a smile, for to scowl would invite sharper jests. You know the rhythm of tavern humor. Better to laugh softly at yourself than to become the butt of crueler jokes. Still, the sting lingers. You sip watered ale, more for appearance than pleasure, and keep your eyes lowered. The tavern is both sanctuary and snare. It offers a pace to sell, to hear, to exist beyond your cottage walls. Yet every moment risks humiliation. Markets, too, are no kinder. On market day, the square fills with stalls and voices, the air thick with the smell of fish, spices, and unwashed bodies. You spread your modest goods, yarn, herbs, perhaps a jug of ale, and brace yourself. Men haggle sharply, offering half what your wares are worth. Women glance at your stall, then turn away as though your goods carry misfortune. Children dart between stalls, mocking your patched cloak. Survival at market is not only a test of trade, but of endurance. Sometimes, though, market brings unexpected fortune. Once a merchant from the city passed through, his eyes sharp beneath a broad hat. He examined your yarn carefully, then paid you a fair price without quibble. The weight of his coins in your hand felt almost miraculous, yet even then you knew better than to rejoice too loudly. Too much success in the market sparks suspicion, envy, whispers of witchcraft. Better to hide the coins beneath your cloak, better to return home quietly, blending back into hunger's shadow. Public spaces expose you in other ways as well. Every step through the tavern, every hour at market, places you under the eyes of others. Some watch with pity, some with lust, some with calculation. You are no longer invisible, but neither are you fully seen. Widowhood renders you half-person, chief symbol, a warning, a temptation, a story waiting to be told by others. And yet, you cannot avoid these spaces, for they are the arteries of survival. To stay home is to starve, to venture out is to risk shame. There are moments of camaraderie, rare but precious. Another widow sits beside you one market day, her goods as meager as yours. You share a few words, then laughter, then the comfort of shared struggle. Together you face the sharp tongues of buyers, supporting one another with small gestures. For a moment you feel less alone, less exposed. But even that camaraderie has limits, for scarcity breeds rivalry. If her goods sell and yours do not, envy creeps like ivy. Even widows must guard themselves against one another, lest desperation turn companionship into competition. The tavern at night is the most dangerous. Drunken men grow bolder, their jokes sharper, their hands less restrained. You have learned to sit close to the wall, shawl drawn tight, eyes down. Once a hand brushed your arm. Lingering too long, You pulled away, heart pounding, praying it would not escalate. Another widow, braver or more desperate, sometimes accepts such attention in exchange for coin or protection. You do not judge her, for you understand, yet you know that such bargains come with their own chains, their own whispered condemnations. The irony is bitter. The very spaces meant for community are the ones that expose you most. The tavern, meant for laughter, becomes a stage for ridicule. The market, meant for trade, becomes a theatre of suspicion. Public life for a widow is survival by performance. Every gesture calculated, every word measured, every smile weighed. One misstep, one laugh too loud, one glance too long, and gossip sharpens into accusation. Still, you return, again and again. Hunger drives you, but so does something quieter, the need to be part of life, to hear voices, to feel the hum of the world beyond your silent cottage. Widowhood isolates, but taverns and markets remind you that you still belong, however uneasily, to the tapestry of the village. Even humiliation is proof of existence, better mocked than forgotten. A quirky story drifts your way, one market day, of a widow in a far-off town who disguised herself as a man to sell goods more freely. She bound her hair, wore a cap, and passed as a poor farmer for years. Only when she died was her secret revealed. Some villagers laugh at the tale, calling it absurd. You, however, feel a flicker of admiration. Perhaps it is not so absurd to take on another skin, another role, just to carve space in a world that leaves little for women alone. You wonder sometimes how different it might be to live in the city, where widows blend into the crowd, where guilds and markets offer broader possibilities. There, perhaps anonymity could be your shield. Here, in the village, every eye knows you, every tongue shapes your story. In the city, you might disappear into the multitude, surviving not by performance but by obscurity. The thought is tempting though dangerous. Cities swallow the weak as easily as they shelter them. Still, the dream lingers, a fantasy of freedom hidden within the noise of streets. Humor again becomes your balm. When a man in the tavern jests that you should brew stronger ale to catch yourself a husband, you reply dryly, "If ale could catch husbands, I'd be drowning in them by now." The laughter that follows is real, even appreciative. For a moment, the jest belongs to you, not them. Humor is your only weapon in such spaces, not sharp enough to wound, but strong enough to shield. The children notice the coins you bring back from market, the small loaves bought with your earnings. They do not ask where you go or what you endure, but they see the weariness in your face, the tension in your shoulders. They know survival is not simple, even if they cannot name its costs. You do not tell them of the laughter, the whispers, the hands that linger too long. You shield them from that truth, as best you can, though deep down you know they will one day learn for themselves. By the end of each day, you return home exhausted from labor, from noise, from vigilance. Yet you also return with something vital, proof that you can endure public judgment, proof that you can survive the tavern's laughter and the market's suspicion. Each coin earned, each loaf bought, is a small victory carved out of humiliation. You sit by the fire, counting your meager gains, and remind yourself that survival is victory enough. And in that quiet moment, you realize something deeper. The tavern and the market may expose you, may humiliate you, but they also refuse to let you vanish. They keep you in the world, however unkindly. They remind you that widowhood is not only solitude, but also persistence. The stubborn insistence on being seen, heard, remembered. Even when mocked, even when pitied, you remain part of the village's story. And that perhaps is worth enduring. The city gates rise before you, wooden and iron, taller than any village wall you've ever known. They creak open at dawn, letting in carts heavy with goods, flocks of sheep, and weary travelers from miles away. You step across the threshold with trembling resolve, leaving behind the fields and lanes of your village. The city, with its towers and spires, its crowded streets and constant noise, promises both danger and possibility. For a widow, it can be both tomb and cradle. The first thing that strikes you is the smell. Smoke, dung, spices, and sweat mingle into a single, overwhelming breath. It clings to your hair, your cloak, your skin, a perfume of survival that no river will wash away. The streets are alive with voices, hawkers crying their wares, apprentices shouting for space, beggars wailing at corners. You have never felt more visible and more invisible at once. In the village, every eye followed you. Here, eyes skim over you, barely noticing. Anonymity tastes strange, like freedom mixed with loneliness. Work in the city is different. There are guilds, organized brotherhoods of craftsmen and traders, each protecting their trade with rules and walls higher than stone. Widows sometimes inherit a husband's workshop, allowed to keep it running until a son grows old enough to take over, but you have no inheritance. You arrive with only your spindle, your herbs and your will. Guilds do not welcome outsiders, least of all women without a man's name to shield them. You must find work in the shadows of their halls. You try spinning first, offering yarn in back alleys and markets. The city women glance at it, shake their heads, and move on to guild stalls where quality is assured. Men snicker that a village widow cannot match a city loom. Hunger drives you to accept less than your labor deserves, trading skeins for stale bread. The city's anonymity hides you, yes, but it also swallows your worth. In a place so crowded, one widow's survival hardly matters. Brewing ale proves no easier. The Alewives Guild patrols the taverns, their members sharp-eyed and merciless. You hear stories of widows fined, beaten, even imprisoned for selling drink without license. Still, you brew small batches in secret, jugs hidden beneath your cloak. You sell to apprentices too poor for guild ale, to beggars who cannot pay tavern prices. It is dangerous, but the coins, though few, keep you alive. You wonder each night if a knock at your door will end it. If tomorrow you will be dragged before the city court for daring to brew without permission. Service in wealthy households offers another path. Widows are hired as nurses, maids, laundresses, cooks. You take work scrubbing floors, your hands raw from lion water. The mistress of the house scolds constantly, her voice sharper than her brew. She reminds you daily that you are lucky to be inside walls rather than begging outside them. You bow, swallow the sting, and keep scrubbing. Pride feeds no one. Obedience, however bitter, keeps a roof over your head. The city exposes you to new dangers too. Streets teem with men who see widows as prey, apprentices drunk on ale, merchants with hands that wander too freely, even guards who demand more than coin at night. You learn quickly to walk in daylight, to keep your eyes lowered, to carry a small knife hidden in your sleeve. You pray you will never need to use it. Fear becomes a second skin, one you cannot remove no matter how warm the day. Yet the city also offers moments of strange wonder. You pass a church taller than any tree you've seen, its bells tolling so loudly the air itself shakes. You glimpse manuscripts in the hands of scholars, letters curling like vines across parchment. Once you see a procession of nobles, their gowns embroidered with gold, their horses draped in velvet. For a heartbeat, you forget hunger and hardship, caught in the shimmer of wealth. But then the crowd presses too close, and you remember that world is not yours. You meet other widows in the city, each carrying her own burden. Some work openly, running stalls or selling bread. Others whisper of debts, of children lost to wardship, of nights spent hiding from landlords. You share scraps of food, bits of advice, even laughter when the air grows too heavy. These small sisterhoods remind you that you are not alone. Widowhood may strip you of a husband, but it binds you to other women in ways both tender and fierce. There are stories of widows who thrived too. A wealthy brewer's widow who took over her husband's tavern and grew rich enough to lend money to nobles. A merchant's widow who managed fleets of ships, her name known across seas. These tales circulate like legends, sparks in the dark. They remind you that widowhood, while heavy, can sometimes be a crown. Yet you know such stories are rare, gilded exceptions rather than rule. For most, widowhood is not power but a daily negotiation with hunger and shame. Sometimes, you allow yourself humor even in the city's cruelty. When a guard sneers that widows should not wander the streets alone, you reply softly, "Better alone than in your company." He stares, then bursts into laughter, leaving you unscathed. The jest is risky, but it saves you. You learn that even here, humor is your weapon. Small, sharp, invisible, but effective. The city courts are another menace. If accused of cheating, of brewing without license, of failing to pay rent, you may be summoned to stand before officials in robes. They read laws you cannot understand, demand fines you cannot pay, Sometimes they release you with warning. Other times they strip what little you own. To enter the court as a widow is to step into a storm without shelter. You pray always to avoid it, and yet there are small triumphs. One winter, you barter herbs for a pair of boots, leather patched but sturdy. Another time you sell enough yarn to buy meat, real meat, not just broth. You roast it slowly, savoring every bite with your children, their faces glowing with joy. These victories are brief, but they shine brightly against the backdrop of struggle. They remind you that survival is not only pain, but also perseverance. The city forces you to harden, to become sharper, quicker, less trusting. You learn which alleys to avoid, which guards to bribe, which markets favor honest trade. You learn to read faces like books, discerning cruelty from kindness in a glance. Widowhood, once a wound, becomes armor. You no longer expect safety. You expect only struggle, and in that expectation, you find strength. Still, you ache for the fields, for the familiar rhythm of your village. The city's noise exhausts you. Its cruelty grinds you down. At night, when the walls close in, you dream of the quiet lanes, the rustle of barley, the sound of children's laughter by the well. You wonder if you traded one kind of isolation for another, if anonymity is only a different form of exile. A quirky tale reaches your ears one evening, of a widow who joined a troupe of actors, disguising herself on stage as queens and witches, earning coins by pretending to be what the world already called her. The absurdity makes you smile. Perhaps you found more freedom in pretense than in truth. Perhaps you think that is what survival really is. A play performed daily, with roles thrust upon you whether you choose them or not. And so, each day in the city you rise, you work, you endure. You sell what you can, serve where you must. Dodge danger where it lurks. You carve existence out of stone, scraping sustenance from streets that give little freely. Widowhood in the city is no easier than in the village, but it is broader, more chaotic, less suffocating. You are no longer the subject of every whisper, yet you are still bound by poverty, by law, by men's eyes. The city is not salvation, but it is survival. And at night, when you lie down on your straw pallet, coins hidden beneath your pillow, you whisper to yourself, you are still here. The city may grind, the guilds may exclude, the courts may threaten, but you remain. And in a world that would rather erase you, remaining is everything. The convent walls rise pale against the horizon, their stone cold and severe, yet softened by ivy and the sound of bells that drift gently on the wind. You stand at the gates, shawl wrapped tightly around your shoulders, considering whether this place might offer sanctuary. For centuries, women like you, widows, stripped of land, dignity or safety, have turned to cloisters as their final refuge. Behind these walls you imagine silence instead of gossip, routine instead of hunger, prayer instead of the endless struggle of markets and taxes. But you also know that the convent's peace carries its own price, one measured in freedom, in labor, and in submission. The nuns greet you with polite reserve, their faces aligned not with malice but with a kind of practiced detachment, as though the world's burdens stop at the convent gate. One sister offers you bread and broth, another a straw pallet in the guest house. You eat in silence, the food plain but filling, a luxury after so many lean meals. For a fleeting moment, you feel almost safe, as though the world's noise has been muffled, but beneath the calm lies unease. You know already that the convent is not a shelter freely given, but a bargain waiting to be struck. In theory, convents welcome widows as novices, allowing them to live out their days in piety. In practice, they require dowries, donations, or service. Noble widows arrive with lands and coin, granted comfortable quarters and respect. Poor widows, like you, bring only labor. If you stay, it will be as laundress, gardener, brewer, or caretaker, still bending your back, now within cloistered walls. Sanctuary is not escape from work, it is merely work rebranded as devotion. You rise early to join the sisters at matins, their chants echoing against stone. The Latin words roll over you like waves, soothing yet incomprehensible. The rhythm of their prayers, the candlelight flickering on pale walls, creates a strange peace. Yet even here, hierarchy reigns. The abbess surveys the novices with sharp eyes, measuring their obedience. Silence is enforced, laughter discouraged, individuality erased. Widowhood once made you too visible, the convent threatens to make you invisible entirely, the sisters speak often of chastity, reminding you that widowhood offers a chance to dedicate your body wholly to God. They praise the example of holy widows who refused remarriage, choosing instead to live in perpetual mourning and prayer. They warn against fleshly temptations, as though your grief still leaves room for such indulgence. You nod dutifully, but inside you cannot help a flicker of sarcasm. If sin lurks in every corner, it must be exhausted by now. You smile at the thought, though you hide it quickly. Humour has little place in cloistered halls. You learn that the convent itself is not free from politics. Wealthy patrons donate land in exchange for prayers. Abbesses court influence with bishops, and even within the walls, rivalries fester. Some sisters resent new arrivals, fearing competition for scarce resources. Others take pride in their humility, reminding you often that suffering is the path to salvation. You wonder if they realize how easy it is to preach suffering when one has a roof, bread, and a community to endure it with. A quirky tidbit reaches your ears from one of the older nuns. Years ago, a widow joined the convent bringing a dowry of geese, not gold. She cared for them obsessively, feeding them scraps, speaking to them as if they were her children. When she died, the geese wandered the cloister for days, honking mournfully. The sisters still chuckle at the memory, though they admit the geese were eventually eaten. The story lingers with you, absurd and sad, a reminder that even in holy walls, hunger wins. Days in the convent blur into rhythm, prayer, work, meals, silence. You spin wool in the cloister yard, your fingers numb in winter, raw in summer. You tend the herb garden, pulling weeds and gathering mint for the infirmary. You sweep long corridors, the sound of your broom echoing like penance. The routine dulls the sharp edge of grief, yet it also dulls joy. You find yourself yearning for laughter, for the noise of the tavern, even for the sting of gossip. At least in the village, you were alive in others' eyes. Here you are a shadow among shadows. The abbess asks whether you wish to take vows. The question is both invitation and command. To refuse may mean leaving, cast back into the world with nothing. To accept means surrendering the last remnants of your independence, your name, your choices, your body. You tell her you need time. She nods, but her eyes are watchful. In the convent, even hesitation is noted. You dream often of your children, wondering if they even know where you are. The convent offers no letters, no contact beyond its walls. To take vows would mean severing that connection forever. You ache with the thought, pressing your face into your palate at night, whispering their names. The silence of the cloister feels heavier than the clamour of the village, pressing your grief inward until it suffocates. One day, a wealthy widow arrives, her cart laden with trunks. She is welcomed with ceremony, given her own chamber, her meals served with better bread. She smiles politely at you, unaware that her presence is a mirror of what you are not. Her widowhood, gilded by wealth, is treated as noble devotion. Yours, stripped of coin, is treated as labour. The difference is not virtue but fortune. The contrast stings though you swallow it like bitter medicine. Still, the convent has its moments of grace. In the stillness of the chapel at dawn, with light filtering through narrow windows, you sometimes feel a peace you never knew in the village. The silence, oppressive at times, can also soothe, wrapping you in calm like a cloak. There are evenings when the sisters sing together, voices rising in harmony, filling the air with beauty. For those moments, you forget hunger, fear, and gossip. You feel part of something larger, something holy. Yet even then, a quiet voice inside reminds you, this peace is borrowed, not free. The abbess reminds you constantly that obedience is the greatest virtue. Yet you wonder if obedience is only another form of exploitation. Cloaked in scripture, you think of your life in the village, of the steward, the gossip, the taxes. Here too, you are watched, judged, measured. Sanctuary, you realize, is never without strings. Whether lord, priest, or abbess, authority always seeks to claim a widow's body and labor. Freedom, it seems, is the one luxury no institution allows. Still, you adapt. You learn to move silently through corridors, to speak only when required, to hide your humor behind a bowed head. You carve small spaces of defiance in secret, a whispered joke to another novice, A stolen moment by the garden wall where you let yourself laugh aloud. These tiny rebellions remind you that even cloistered, you remain yourself. Widowhood may strip you of status, but it cannot erase your spirit. The sisters warn often of the world's dangers, urging you to remain within the safety of the convent. Yet you know safety here is fragile. Famine can still strike, raiders can still burn, even bishops can close convent doors if politics shift. To place your trust entirely in walls is folly. You remind yourself that survival has never come from institutions, but from resilience. Whether in village or cloister, you endure because you refuse to vanish. Humor creeps back even here. When a novice complains that fasting leaves her too weak to scrub floors, you whisper that surely God prefers clean souls over clean corridors. She stifles a laugh, glancing nervously at the abbess. For a moment, the cloister feels lighter. Laughter, you realize, is as holy as prayer. It reminds you that humanity survives even under strict rule. The convent may not be freedom, but it is shelter. You sleep without fear of footsteps outside your door. You eat daily meals, however plain. The trade is clear. Safety for obedience, bread for silence, sanctuary for surrender. Whether that bargain is worth it, only time will tell. For now you remain, half comforted, half restless, caught between the longing for peace and the ache for freedom. And at night, when the bells toll Compline and the convent sinks into silence, you lie awake on your straw pallet, staring at the shadows on the wall. You wonder if this is sanctuary or prison, blessing or exile. Perhaps it is both. Widowhood. You realize there's always been this. A life lived in spaces between, never fully belonging, always negotiating survival. And whether in village lane or cloister hall, the truth remains the same. Endurance is your only vow. The bells of the convent fade into memory as you step back into the world, carrying with you a choice you did not take. You return to the village lanes, and the smell of wood smoke, the clatter of carts, the endless whispers that follow your every move. Soon enough, another decision arrives, this one less cloistered but no less binding, whether to remarry. Widowhood is seen not as a state to endure, but as an interval, a pause before you return to a man's household. Everyone, from priest to neighbor, seems eager to remind you that remarriage is your natural course. The pressure hums around you like bees in summer, constant, insistent, impossible to ignore. Suitors do not arrive with roses or poetry, they arrive with calculations. One widower, grey-bearded with 3 children of his own, comes to your door with a blunt proposal. Marry him, and you will share his hearth. Your dowry, meagre though it is, will help secure his farm, and your labor will mend his household. He does not ask about your feelings, your grief, or your dreams. To him you are an equation, 2 hands to spin wool, 1 womb perhaps. Still fertile, 1 body to warm a bed. His words are practical, but beneath them lies the unspoken truth. You are an object of exchange, not affection. Family joins the chorus. A cousin reminds you that remarriage will ease the burden on them, for they have given bread when you starved, and coin when you begged. You must think of the children, they insist. A husband will shield them. You nod, though the thought cuts. A husband may shield, yes, but he may also command. Silence, consume. Remarriage is no guarantee of protection. It is only a guarantee of dependence, binding you again to another's will. The priest grows louder in his suggestions. He preaches from the pulpit that widows must not linger too long in solitude, lest idleness lead them into sin. He cites scripture, reminding you of widows who found virtue in new unions. After Mass, he corners you near the church door, urging you to consider the widower 2 villages over, a man of respectable means. Respectable, perhaps, but with a reputation for harshness. You know the priest's interest lies less in your safety than in maintaining order. A woman alone unsettles the tidy lines of parish life. You hear of other widows who remarried quickly, some thriving, others crushed beneath new bonds. One woman married a man who treated her kindly, raising her children as his own, securing her place in the community. Another married a drunkard who squandered her dowry, beat her in drunken rages, and left her poorer than before. Remarriage, you realize, is a gamble. The dice may land in your favor, but more often they tumble into ruin. And unlike dice, you cannot roll again. The suitors grow bolder. One younger man jokes at the market that he would take you as wife if only you bring a cow with the bargain. The laughter that follows is coarse, but the joke reveals the truth. Your worth is measured not in yourself, but in what you can carry into a union. Property, dowry, labor. These are the terms of marriage. Love is a luxury, whispered of in songs but absent in the contracts that govern real lives. Still, there is a lure in remarriage. The thought of a roof secured, of children shielded, of neighbors silenced by respectability. You imagine waking in a bed warmed by another body, not by loneliness. You imagine meals with more than thin broth, nights without the fear of footsteps outside your door. Security tempts you, even as independence whispers its own seduction. Freedom is meager, but it is yours. Remarriage offers plenty, but at the price of yourself. The children sense the pressure too. Your daughter, quiet but sharp, asks one evening if you will wed again. You hesitate, then answer that you do not know. She nods solemnly, as if she understands more than her years should allow. Your son, younger and more blunt, insists he does not want another man in the house. His words strike you, for it is not only your fate at stake, but theirs. A new husband could protect, yes, but he could also command and discipline them, use them. The gamble widens, and you must wager not only your own life but theirs. A story circulates of a widow who refused all suitors, declaring she would remain single until her death. Some admired her defiance, others mocked her stubbornness. She lived alone until old age, surviving by spinning and brewing. When she died, the villagers said she had grown proud, unnatural, unfeminine. Even in death, she was not free from judgment. You wonder if that would be your fate, should you refuse remarriage. To live alone is survival, but to die alone is scandal. Humor flickers even in this grim theatre. One day, a neighbor suggests slyly that you could wed the blacksmith, that he could keep your fires hot. You answer with a dry smile. His forge may be hot, but his bed is cold with snores. The laughter that follows disarms the moment, reminding you that wit is still your shield. Even when pressured, you can shape the story with your own tongue. The pressure does not relent. Some days, you almost yield. The thought of steady bread, of safety for your children, lures you like the smell of roasting meat. Other days, you steel yourself, clinging to the fragile dignity of independence. Widowhood is exhausting. Yes, but it is your exhaustion, your life, your labor. To remarry would be to surrender the little space you carved from the world. The choice feels less like freedom than like choosing which chain to wear. The priest grows sharper in his sermons. He warns that widows who linger unmarried risk leading others into temptation. His eyes flicker toward you as he speaks. You bow your head, but inside, you rage. You think of the countless men who drink, gamble, and sin openly, yet face no such scrutiny. Widowhood, you realize, is not only a state of lack, but a stage for hypocrisy. Your grief is policed more harshly than men's indulgence. Your dreams betray you, offering visions of both paths. In one, you see yourself remarried, seated at a full table, your children laughing, your hunger eased. In another, you see yourself bowed beneath a man's command, silenced, erased. You wake unsettled, unable to decide which dream holds more truth. Perhaps both do. Perhaps remarriage is always both salvation and prison, gift and chain. You consider running to the city again, hiding in its chaos, avoiding the question entirely. Yet you know the city holds its own chains, its own pressures. There is no escape from expectation, only different masks. Whether in village or city, convent or cottage, a widow is always judged, always measured. Remarriage is simply the most visible measure, the test of whether you will fold back into the pattern or insist on weaving your own thread. One evening, as the sun sets blood red over the fields, you sit alone and weigh the choice. You turn the suitors' faces over in your mind, their proposals, their calculations. You think of your children's voices, of the gossiping neighbors, of the priest's stern warnings. You think too of your own weary heart, longing for peace but unwilling to surrender entirely. You realize there may be no right choice, only the choice you can live with. And so, you rise, deciding nothing yet, but carrying both futures within you. Remarriage waits like a gate, one you may pass through or turn from. For now, you walk the narrow road between, balancing freedom and security, hunger and respectability, solitude and surrender. Widowhood, you realize, is not merely about loss, it is about the relentless weight of choices, each one heavy with consequences. At night you whisper to yourself that whatever path you take, you will endure. Whether as wife again or widow still, whether chained or free, you will survive. Survival is your vow, your defiance, your legacy. And in a world that insists on defining you by men, that vow is the truest marriage of all. A marriage to yourself. The stories of wealthy widows drift through the village like distant songs, carried on the tongues of travelers, priests, and envious neighbors. They are told with a mixture of awe and scorn, as if such women are both admired and despised in equal measure. You hear of them while kneeling at the well, while waiting at market, while passing the church gates. Tales of women who wield power, not through husbands but through the fortune that widowhood unexpectedly delivers. Their names are spoken with grudging respect, their lives exaggerated until they sound almost mythical. For a poor widow, these stories are both tantalizing and cruel, reminders of what could be, but never is. One tale tells of Lady Eleanor, a noble woman whose husband died leaving her vast estates. Instead of surrendering them to his kin, she took the reins herself. She collected rents, hired stewards, and managed the harvest with such efficiency that her wealth grew. Men called her unnatural, a woman acting like a lord. Yet they also came to her court with bowed heads, for her coin was strong, her judgment sharp. Some whispered she even advised knights and bishops, her voice shaping decisions usually reserved for men. Imagine that, a widow not silenced, but amplified. Then there is the story of a brewer's widow in the city, Mistress Anne. When her husband died, she inherited his tavern. Rather than remarry, she ran it herself, hiring men to do the heavy work, keeping accounts with ruthless precision. In time, her ale became so renowned that guilds sought her favor, not her exclusion. She lent money to apprentices, invested in grain shipments, and lived comfortably. Some praised her skill, others muttered that she must have bewitched her barrels. To succeed without a man, after all, was always suspicious. These stories travel far, embroidered with details both true and false. Some claim wealthy widows flaunted their power, dressing in rich gowns, wearing jewels, dining on venison and fine wine. Others insist they lived modestly, fearful of envy's bite. Either way, their lives are framed as rare exceptions, shimmering against the bleak backdrop of most widows' poverty. For every Lady Eleanor, there are 100 women bent over spindles, begging for scraps, mocked in taverns. Wealth makes the difference, turning widowhood from curse into crown. You cannot help but imagine yourself in their place. What if your husband had left land, or coin, or even a small business? What if you could stand in court with stewards bowing before you, instead of pleading before bailiffs? The thought makes you smile bitterly. For you, wealth is a story told about others, never lived. Widowhood has taught you that luck of birth matters more than virtue, more than labor, more even than faith. Neighbors speak of these wealthy widows with a curious mix of envy and disdain. Too proud, they say, shaking their heads. A woman should not wield such power. Yet in the same breath they admit they would gladly serve in her household, or borrow her coin if offered. Men mutter that such women are dangerous, tempting men away from proper authority. Women whisper that they are enviable, though they cloak the envy in piety. Gossip about wealthy widows is sharper than any about poor ones, for it is sharpened by jealousy. In rare cases, wealthy widows wielded power, even in politics. Chronicles speak of queens who ruled regencies, holding thrones for their sons until they came of age. Some wielded armies, some struck treaties, some defied lords. Their names appear in books, carved in stone, remembered in song. Yet for every queen, there were countless unnamed women, whose small fortunes allowed them to rule households, businesses, or parishes in quieter ways. Power, like wealth, leaves uneven traces, loud when noble, invisible when humble. We recall a quirky story told by a passing minstrel of a wealthy widow who refused all suitors, declaring that she would rather marry her cat. She left her fortune to a convent, but in her will she demanded her cat be cared for as a noble. The tale is half jest, half truth, and the crowd laughed heartily when he sang it. Yet beneath the laughter lies admiration. Here was a woman so wealthy she could thumb her nose at every man who sought her dowry. The cat, in its way, became a symbol of her defiance. Of course, wealth did not erase danger. A rich widow was a prize, her fortune drawing suitors like flies. Some courted politely, others schemed, even threatened. There are tales of wealthy widows forced into remarriage, their estates swallowed by new husbands. Others were accused of witchcraft or greed, punished for daring to stand alone. Power drew envy, and envy drew peril. To be wealthy was not to be safe, it was simply to face a different breed of threat. Still, you cannot deny the allure of these stories. They are proof, however fragile, that widowhood need not always mean despair. They show that, with the right fortune, a woman could step beyond the narrow lanes of expectation, carving her own path. Even if such lives are rare, they shimmer like stars over the dark fields of your own existence, reminding you of possibilities that defy the weight of custom. When you mention such stories at the well, other women scoff. Those are not for the likes of us, they say. Better to keep our heads down. Yet in their eyes, you see the flicker of longing. Every widow, no matter how poor, imagines at least once what it would mean to hold power, to silence gossip with coin, to meet stewards as equals. The dream is a quiet rebellion, carried in hearts even when tongues deny it. You think of your children again, of how different their lives might be if wealth were theirs. No wardship, no hunger, no humiliation in taverns. They would be educated, respected, courted. A wealthy widow could secure futures, while you can only pray for survival. The injustice gnaws at you, sharper than envy, for it shows that widowhood's suffering is not natural, but constructed, built by laws and customs that privilege wealth above all. Humor creeps in, despite the bitterness. One evening, you mutter to yourself that if wealth truly brought freedom, you would marry your spindle and leave your fortune to your loom. The thought makes you laugh, imagining your tools robed in silk, bowing gravely as heirs. It is absurd, but the absurdity comforts you. Sometimes mocking dreams is the only way to bear them. You hear too of widows who use their wealth for charity, founding hospitals, donating to convents, feeding the poor. They are praised as saints, their generosity praised in sermons. Yet you wonder if charity is only another mask of power, a way to soften envy's sting. Perhaps they gave not from kindness but from strategy to protect themselves from gossip, from resentment, from suspicion. Power, after all, is never safe unless it cloaks itself in virtue. The contrast between rich and poor widows becomes sharper each time you hear such stories. You spin wool until your fingers bleed, while others feast on venison. You beg for mercy from stewards, while others command them with ease. The divide is cruel, but it also clarifies. Widowhood is not one story, but many. It is a mirror that reflects class as much as gender, showing that survival depends not only on resilience, but on the luck of wealth. And yet, you take some comfort in knowing that even the wealthy are not free. Their power is tempered by envy, their freedom shadowed by suitors, their wealth tied to scrutiny. They too must endure, though differently. In that thought lies a strange equality. All widows, rich or poor, live under watch, under judgment, under pressure. Wealth changes the color of the cage, but not its bars. At night, lying by the fire, you imagine Lady Eleanor, Mistress Anne, and the cat-loving widow, their names woven into story. You picture them strong, unyielding, walking with heads high. You smile faintly, knowing their stories may be half fable, half truth. But fables have their use. They give you courage. They remind you that women can wield power, even when the world insists otherwise. And though you may never hold such wealth, the dream itself steals your heart. Perhaps you think, every widow's true inheritance is not land or coin, but resilience. Wealthy or poor, noble or common, each must navigate a world eager to exploit her. Some succeed grandly, others humbly, but all endure. And in that endurance lies a power greater than fortune, the power to survive, to remain, to carry stories forward. It starts with cows. One family's milk soured, another's calf died suddenly, and tongues wagged that it was no accident. A neighbor recalls seeing you gathering herbs at dusk, your cloak dark against the fields, your hands full of leaves. The image spreads quickly. The widow in the twilight, muttering to herself, carrying plants no one else can name. The herbs meant for healing are retold as tools of curses. It doesn't matter that you use them to soothe coughs, to flavor broth, to tend fevers. In story, they become sinister. Then a child falls ill, fever burning through his small body. His mother, desperate for a reason, mutters that perhaps someone brought ill luck upon them. The priest does not name you directly, but in his sermon he warns that Satan preys most on the vulnerable, widows alone and unprotected. The villagers hear what they want. Vulnerable does not mean pitied, it means suspect. Suddenly, your grief-strained face looks like a mask, your silence like secrecy, your survival like sorcery. You notice the change in how people look at you. At market, buyers avoid your stall. The innkeeper frowns when you enter, muttering that your ale might be strange. Even children, once only mocking, now keep their distance. Their rhymes change. No longer silly songs about widows seeking company, but darker chants of witches brewing spells. Their laughter stings sharper now, for it carries the echo of their parents' fear. It seems absurd, almost laughable, until it is not. You recall the tale of an old widow in a nearby town, dragged before the court because her neighbour's bread refused to rise. They searched her cottage, found a black cat, and declared it her familiar. She was whipped, shamed, and left broken. You had laughed bitterly when you first heard the tale, mocking the stupidity of it. Now, the laughter dies in your throat. You see how easily such absurdities take root, how quickly suspicion grows fertile in the soil of ignorance. Your own herbs become a burden. You still gather them, feverfew, mint, nettles, but you do so in secret, before dawn or after dusk, when no eyes can mark you. You hide them in pouches under your cloak, whispering prayers aloud to cloak your silence. You wonder if even prayer might one day be twisted against you, a chant mistaken for spell. Widowhood, once only a social cage, now feels like a trap baited by every action. Superstition is fickle. However, when the harvest proves bountiful, suspicion wanes, and you are merely the widow again, pitiable, mocked, but not feared. But when the rains come late, when bread grows scarce, when fever spreads, the whispers return with sharper teeth. Misfortune demands a culprit, and who better than the woman alone? Without husband's shield, without wealth's protection, a widow makes a perfect scapegoat, a vessel for others' fear. You remember a quirky story you once overheard of a widow in France accused of cursing her neighbour's bees. They claimed her gaze alone caused hives to wither. She defended herself with humour, saying if she truly had such power, she would curse her own hives into giving honey without labour. The judge laughed, dismissed the case, and she was spared. The tale lingers in your mind, absurd but instructive. Sometimes humour is sharper than denial. Perhaps laughter can still cut through fear's fog. Yet the fear gnaws at you still. You bolt your door tighter at night, listening for footsteps that might not bring neighbours but a mob. You keep a small bundle ready, herbs, coins, a shawl in case you must flee suddenly. You dream of flames, of ropes, of courts where men shout accusations you cannot answer. You wake sweating, heart pounding, whispering prayers not for salvation but for simple survival. The priest's words do not help. He preaches often of temptation, of women's weakness, of Eve's sin. He does not name you, but his gaze lingers. You know that should the parish truly seek a witch, his silence would not protect you. He would weigh his own authority above your life. Perhaps he believes his warnings guide you. In truth, they only sharpen others' suspicion. Widowhood, you realize, is not only grief and hunger, it is living under the constant threat of accusation. The children sense it too. They hear the whispers, see the wary looks. Your daughter asks if you are a witch. The question wounds more than any gossip, yet you force a smile, telling her gently that no, you are only her mother, who mends cloaks and brews broth. She nods, half convinced, but the doubt lingers in her eyes. Even children absorb suspicion, their trust eroded by rumour. It is a cruel theft, stealing not only reputation but innocence. Despite the fear, you refuse to vanish. You continue to gather herbs, to spin wool, to sell ale. To retreat would be to admit guilt, to confirm their stories. Instead, you walk the lanes with head high. Though your stomach twists with dread, defiance becomes your survival, a performance of confidence masking fear. If they see you tremble, they will believe their suspicions. If they see you endure, perhaps they will doubt themselves. Widowhood demands courage even when courage feels impossible. There are nights, however, when courage fails, when you sit by the fire with tears staining your face, whispering to no one. You wonder if the whispers will one day catch fire, if you will be the next tale told at markets, the next warning carved into memory. You wonder if endurance is enough, if survival alone can shield you forever. The fear is heavy, but so too is your will. You cling to it like a rope, hands raw, refusing to let go. Humor returns, stubborn as ever. One evening, you tell yourself aloud, if they accuse you of witchcraft, you'll demand they at least let you turn their gossip into gold before they burn you. The absurdity makes you laugh, a laugh half bitter, half true. Laughter does not erase fear, but it reminds you that fear has not consumed you. It is your last defense, your quiet rebellion. And so, you live on, balanced on superstition's knife edge. Each day brings new rumors, each night new prayers. You remain, not because you are safe, but because you refuse to vanish into their stories. If they call you witch, healer, widow, cursed, blessed, let them. You will endure, as you always have, carrying your grief, your hunger, your wit. For widowhood is not merely the absence of a husband, it is the presence of a will that refuses to break, even when the world calls you everything but human. The gossip about witches fades for a time, but another kind of story begins to rise, one told not by neighbors but by widows themselves. You hear of women who refuse quietly to accept the roles pressed upon them, who march into manor courts or parish halls demanding justice. Their names are not written in chronicles, but whispered from mouth to mouth like sparks smouldering under ash. They are remembered less as saints and more as troublemakers, yet their defiance carries weight. In their voices you hear echoes of your own longing to resist. The first tale comes from a nearby market town, of a widow who refused to pay her lord's excessive harriet. Instead of handing over her cow, she dragged it herself to the manor court, tethered it outside the door, and demanded that the lord justify his claim before the villagers. They laughed, they murmured, and under such scrutiny, the lord relented. The woman kept her cow. Her defiance became a local legend, retold with pride. It makes you wonder if sometimes resistance succeeds not by strength, but by spectacle. Closer to home, another widow is said to have brought a steward before the bishop's court, accusing him of exploiting her watered children's land for his own profit. She spoke clearly, without shame, demanding restitution. Though the court ruled partly against her, she recovered a portion of what was stolen. The boldness alone marked her as extraordinary. Most widows bow their heads and endure. She raised hers and fought. You imagine her voice ringing in the hall, steady as stone, and feel a thrill of kinship. Of course, such defiance carries risks. There are darker tales of widows who resisted too loudly and were punished. One demanded fair wages for her spinning, only to be banned from the market entirely. Another confronted a drunken reeve and was beaten in the square, her body left bruised but her spirit unbroken. To resist as a widow is to gamble with everything. Your safety, your shelter, your very place in the community. Yet for some, silence is the heavier burden. You begin to sense that resistance takes many forms, not only the loud ones. A neighbor tells of a widow who hid a portion of her grain before the steward arrived, burying it in a hollow barrel. When questioned, she feigned ignorance, eyes wide, voice meek. She survived the winter with that hidden food. Small defiance, quiet rebellion, yet no less powerful. Perhaps resistance is not always standing tall in court. Sometimes it is crouching low, outsmarting those who seek to strip you bare. In your own heart, defiance stirs quietly. When the steward demands more than you can pay, you do not cry. Instead, you hand him cracked eggs, thin ale, patched cloth, mocking him silently with scraps dressed as tribute. When gossip whispers witchcraft, you answer with humor, twisting suspicion into laughter. These may not be grand gestures, but they are yours. In small ways, you refuse to surrender fully, even as the world insists you must. Still, the temptation to bolder resistance lingers. You dream of walking into the manor court, speaking as the bold widows did, demanding justice for taxes, for wardship, for gossip that stains your name. In dreams, your voice is steady, the villagers cheer, the steward falters. But when you wake, reality weighs heavy. You have no coin for lawyers, no noble kin to shield you, no audience eager to applaud. Dreams of defiance are easier than acts of it. Yet dreams are seeds, and seeds sometimes grow. A quirky tale reaches you one winter night of a widow who, tired of suitors pressing her, staged her own mock marriage to a goose. She paraded the bird through the streets, declaring she was wed and no longer available. The villagers laughed, the suitors retreated, and she lived in peace thereafter. Whether the tale is true or not, it makes you laugh until your sides ache. Absurd, yes, but also ingenious. Resistance need not always be solemn. Sometimes it can be ridiculous, and still effective. The church, of course, frowns on such women. Priests preach obedience, reminding widows that patience and humility are their only virtues. But behind closed doors, even nuns whisper admiration for widows who fight back. You once overheard a sister murmur that stubborn women are closer to saints than cowards are. It startled you, the idea that resistance could itself be holy, that God might smile not only on meekness, but on courage. Perhaps defiance is not sin at all, but prayer in action. Neighbors view resistors with mixed eyes. Some admire, secretly thrilled by the defiance they cannot show themselves. Others fear, worrying that bold widows bring punishment down on everyone. To resist is to stand apart, to mark yourself as different. In a village, difference is dangerous, yet the stories endure, told around hearths with awe, caution, envy. They remind everyone that even widows can be more than shadows. You think of your daughter, growing taller, her eyes keen. What lesson will you give her? To bow her head and survive quietly, or to raise her voice and risk? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one path, but in teaching her both. That silence can protect, but speech can also transform. Widowhood teaches not one lesson, but many, each tailored to the moment, each born of necessity. Resistance sometimes comes from desperation. You hear of a widow who set fire to her lord's barn after he evicted her. She fled into the forest, joining outlaws. Her tale is retold with both horror and admiration. Was she criminal or heroine? Perhaps both. You wonder if she still lives, free among the trees, or if she lies in a shallow grave, forgotten. Defiance may burn bright, but its flame is hard to sustain. Humor, again, softens the weight. When someone at market mocks you for being alone, you reply, "At least I need not argue with a husband over whose turn it is to fetch water." The laughter ripples, and the mockery fades. Small as it is, that moment is resistance too, claiming space through wit, refusing to be crushed beneath ridicule. Sometimes the sharpest blade is a well-timed jest. The truth you come to understand is this: resistance is not always triumph. Often it is survival, a refusal to vanish, to hide grain, to mock suitors, to laugh at gossip, to drag a cow into court. These are all forms of saying no, however quietly. Widowhood forces women to the margins, but from the margins, sometimes the strongest voices rise. You begin to see yourself less as victim, and more as participant in this long, quiet battle. You are not alone. You are part of a lineage of widows who resisted in ways large and small. Their stories strengthen you, even when you feel weakest. Each act of defiance, whether remembered or forgotten, weaves into a tapestry of endurance that stretches across time. And though fear remains, fear of steward, of gossip, of hunger, it no longer feels absolute. Courage does not erase fear, it lives alongside it. You walk the lanes with straighter back, knowing that you carry not only your burden but also the memory of others who refuse to bow. That knowledge is shield enough, at least for now. At night, by the fire, you whisper to yourself that resistance need not change the world. It need only keep you whole, to laugh when mocked, to survive when expected to fail, to remain when others would erase you. These are victories. Small, quiet, but real. Widowhood may strip you of much, but it cannot strip you of defiance, unless you let it, and you will. The night stretches long, its silence filled with the echoes of years lived under strain. You sit by the hearth, the embers dim, the shadows dancing across the walls of your small cottage. The world outside is hushed. No steward's knock, no neighbor's whispers, no priest's sermon, only the stillness of a life that has endured, scarred yet unbroken. Widowhood has been a long road. Hunger, gossip, taxes, suspicion, endless choices pressed upon you. Now, as the years have gathered, you find yourself reflecting not only on survival, but on the quiet weight of memory. Tonight the air smells of damp earth and smoke from distant chimneys. You wrap your shawl tighter, the wool worn thin but familiar, a cloak that has seen you through countless seasons. You remember the early days, that first night of silence after your husband's death, the bailiff's parchment, the gossip at the well. Each memory rises like a ghost, not to haunt but to remind. You have lived many lives within one, each marked by endurance, each leaving lines on your face like etchings on parchment. Your children are grown now, scattered by the currents of wardship, labour and marriage. Some you see rarely, others not at all. Yet when you close your eyes you still feel their small hands tugging at your skirts, their laughter spilling across the cottage. You carry them always, even in absence. Perhaps this is the truest weight of widowhood, the ache of love stretched thin across distance, never broken but never whole. The village too has changed. Faces that once gossiped about you have vanished into the earth, their whispers silenced by death. New mouths speak new stories, but you no longer flinch. Age has a way of dulling the sting of gossip. You smile faintly when you hear your name now, amused rather than wounded. Once their judgment felt like chains. Now it feels like wind, noisy, fleeting, unable to hold you down. You think of the priest, long since replaced by another. His sermons once pierced your heart with guilt and fear. Now they drift past you like smoke, their weight diminished. You pray still, but your prayers are not for salvation. They are for endurance, for peace, for the strength to carry another day. Faith has become less about fear of sin and more about gratitude for small mercies. A warm fire, a loaf of bread, the rare letter from a distant child. Superstition, too, no longer frightens you. Once the accusation of witchcraft loomed like fire in the dark. Now you laugh softly at the memory. You survived the whispers, survived the suspicion, survived the weight of others' fears. Perhaps survival itself is proof enough that you were never what they claimed. You are not witch, not saint, not symbol. You are simply a woman who endured. And in that endurance, you find a strange kind of holiness. The stories of wealthy widows still reach your ears, sometimes. Tales of estates managed, fortunes built, power wielded. But now, instead of envy, you feel distance. Their lives were never yours to claim. Their power was gilded. Yours was carved from hunger and labour. And yet, you wonder if perhaps your survival carries a different kind of power. To have lived with nothing, yet remained, is its own triumph. Wealth shields, but resilience transforms. You smile when you recall the absurd tales. The widow who wed her goose, the one who cursed bees, the one who mocked suitors with wit. Their humour lingers, their defiance echoes. You realise now that laughter has been your constant companion, the thread that stitched your days together. Humour softened hunger, mocked authority, eased suspicion. Without it, widowhood would have been unbearable. With it, you carved joy from bitterness, light from shadow. The convent bells still toll in your memory, their sound a reminder of the path you did not take. You wonder sometimes what life might have been had you stayed within those walls, trading freedom for safety, silence for bread. Would you have found peace, or only another kind of cage? The question lingers, unanswered, but it no longer troubles you. Choices made and unmade are both part of who you have become. Widowhood is less about the paths taken than about the endurance of walking at all. You think, too, of resistance. The widow who dragged her cow to court, the one who sued the steward, the one who burned her lord's barn. Their stories stir warmth in your chest. You may not have stood in courts or lit fires, but you resisted in your own ways, with cracked eggs, with laughter, with silence that concealed strength. Resistance takes many forms, and each one matters. Together they weave a tapestry of women who refuse to vanish. Even when the world demanded they fade, the seasons turn, and age bends your back, but not your will. You move slower, your hands ache, your eyes blur in dim light, yet you continue to spin, to mend, to stir broth over the fire. Work, once a burden, has become rhythm. It carries you through the days, anchors you in the nights. You know now that labour was never just survival. It was defiance, a refusal to yield to despair. Every thread spun, every loaf baked, was a prayer written not in words but in action. Loneliness still lingers, though softer now. It creeps into evenings when the fire burns low, into mornings when the bed feels too wide. Yet, loneliness has become familiar, less enemy than companion. You have learned to fill it with memory, with prayer, with laughter at absurdities only you can hear. You talk sometimes to your absent children, sometimes to your long-dead husband, sometimes to no one at all. The silence answers, and in its way, that is enough. You recall, with a wry smile, the priest's old promise that the meek shall inherit the earth. You laugh at the irony. The meek inherit little here, but perhaps endurance itself is an inheritance, one you pass to your children, one you leave in the soil of your village. Your name may not be carved on stone, but your survival is written in their lives, in the stories they will tell. That, you realize, is enough legacy for any widow. The village children, once cruel with rhymes, now run past you with respect. They carry baskets for you, open doors, call you mother, though you are no kin. Age has shifted your place, from suspicion to wisdom, from ridicule to reverence. The widow once mocked is now the elder, her endurance transmuted into authority. You smile at their chatter, grateful for the circle of life's irony. Judgment fades, memory softens. At market your yarn sells quickly, not out of pity, but of trust. Neighbors praise your skill, joke about your sharp tongue, admire your humor. You chuckle at their change of heart, but you accept it. Time reshapes everything, even gossip. You realize now that reputation is like thread, fragile when spun, strong when woven. Your life, stitched from years of labor and laughter, has become fabric the village recognizes as sturdy, reliable. You sit one evening with another widow, younger than you once were, her face pale with fear. She asks how to endure, how to survive the whispers, the taxes, the loneliness. You take her hand and tell her the truth. Survival is not one lesson, but many. Some days you bow, some days you laugh, some days you hide, some days you fight. There is no single way to live widowhood, only the will to continue. She nods, her eyes brighter. You see yourself in her, the woman you once were, and in teaching her, you feel lighter, as though passing the torch of endurance itself. As the years stretch, you begin to soften your thoughts. You do not rage at the steward's memory, nor curse the priest's sermons. Instead, you smile at their absurdity, at the smallness of their power compared to the vastness of life. You realize now that they were not the center of your story. You were. Their voices were loud, yes, but your endurance was louder. Widowhood has taught you not to measure life by what was taken, but by what remained. The fire crackles low, and your body sinks deeper into the chair. You close your eyes, the weight of memory heavy but not cruel. You think of the field winds, the tavern laughter, the convent bells, the market noise, the gossip, the rumors, the laughter, the tears. All of it, woven together, has been your life. Hard, yes. Lonely, yes. But also full of endurance, full of quiet triumph, full of moments that refuse to vanish. And so, the long night quiets. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting each breath carry away the years of fear and burden. You whisper a final prayer, not for salvation, but for peace. Peace for yourself, for your children, for every widow who endures still. The shadows deepen, the embers fade, and the night folds around you like a cloak. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let this story settle like a gentle lullaby. Widowhood was never simple, never kind, yet it was lived fully, stubbornly, defiantly. Rest now, knowing that in telling this long, strange journey you have carried the weight and laid it down. The world may forget your name, but it cannot erase your endurance. Sleep softly, for you have walked the narrow road, and you have remained.